every second, every minute, our sound is on. When we go to sleep, the camera shuts off.
Correct. Sound is on.
Sound is on. The sound is on. How do you know that sound is on? Because you wake up to the alarm clock.
Yeah.
Because as human beings,
Yeah.
that was our early warning system.
Yeah.
So when I'm sleeping under a tree or I'm sleeping in a bush, and the only thing that will warn me is my hearing. Ustadji would sing for hours on it. Now you had to edit the whole thing and bring it down to 1 hour because side A was 30 minutes, side B was 30 minutes. So you had to edit it, and that edit was not like a random edit. You had to make sure that the repetitions were cut and that the whole structure of the song was not disturbed. There are these layers of sound that are there. So there are these obvious sounds which are going to, you have to make in your, you have to create. We call them tracks. So there are hundreds. I have at least 500 to 600 tracks playing all the time in my, yeah. In Bajirao, I had 7 layers of footsteps. For one king. I needed the squeak of the leather, I needed the heaviness of the footfall, I needed his body weight, because what happens is he's a king. His footfall should have that authority. How do you give that authority? You give it with density and sound. Even one gunshot. If you hear a regular 9mm on the road, it'll sound like a firecracker. On a huge 70mm screen, when you're having a close-up of the gun, that needs to be layered with several other sounds. So I have layered it with explosions, with tank guns, with bombs and everything, with low, including a pistol sound. So it's a collection of all these sounds designed in such a way that it gives you a dum. Suddenly I had this huge, there's a whole helicopter that just comes and flies very close to your roof. And he wakes up with a start, and there's a ceiling fan which is also running. Your creativeness, your creative involvement as a sound engineer became far more complex. So very sadly, what has happened is Bombay had a very nice violin section, very nice percussion section. Their children did not come back because it was years of experience, years of riyaz before you became a very good musician.
Yeah.
And when you became a very good musician, there was no pay.
But thank you, Vishwadeep. I'm really happy that you're here on this conversation, and I'm sure my audience also will be really happy about listening you.
Thank you, Murli, and thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
If I ask you to introduce yourself to a 10th standard kid, how would you introduce yourself as a professional?
As a professional, I try and explain to people who are not really familiar with what goes on behind the scenes. I tell them very frankly that, look, whatever you hear in the film is my responsibility. Like you have a DOP, he's responsible for what you see in the film. And as a sound designer, I'm responsible for what you hear in the film. So all the sounds that you hear in a film, that is my responsibility.
Okay, this is, see, normally when we watch a film, we hear the dialogues, and sometime you listen to the background music. Is that the only thing which happens, or like what exactly goes into when you say you are a sound designer? You know, that's the designation you have. Like what generally go into that?
Yeah, this is actually a very complex. There's a very complex answer to this question, because what happens is a lot of people take hearing for granted. Leave the camera and the recorders and the mics apart. Normally, when we are conversing, when I'm talking to somebody or you're talking to me, we are focusing on each other's dialogue. We are totally oblivious about what is happening around. Not because they don't happen, but because the brain does not, it does not, you're not conscious of what all the sounds are happening. Right now, when we are sitting and talking, there is a hum of the air conditioner, there are some distant traffic sounds coming, there are some kids playing in the park, there are some, there's constantly a lot of sound happening around us. Our brain, if only you concentrate on what you're hearing, you will be able to, consciously, if you close your eyes, I tell this to a lot of people in my workshops or in wherever I'm talking. I tell them, close your eyes when you get up in the morning for 30 seconds or 1 minute. Just listen to all the sounds around you. You'll be surprised with the amount of data that is there.
Correct.
and I'm calling it data because there are sounds. They are like, you'll hear birds, you'll hear your neighborhood's television, your neighbor's television. You'll hear children playing in the park. You'll hear traffic lights. You'll hear your own household sounds, your washing machine, your kitchen sounds, your doorbell ringing, somebody's mobile ringing. So there is a lot of sound activity that is going on around us.
When you shut your visual, you start listening to that.
Yeah, when you shut your eyes, you're concentrating and you're consciously concentrating, then you notice that these are the layers of sounds that are all around you.
Right.
So, another interesting thing is we are constantly hearing 360 days, every second, every minute. Our sound is on. When we go to sleep, the camera shuts off.
Correct. Sound is on.
Sound is on. The sound is on. How do you know that sound is on? Because you wake up to the alarm clock.
Yeah.
Or you wake up to a calling bell.
Yeah.
Or you wake up to somebody shouting. But that is how evolution has designed us.
Yeah.
Because as human beings, that was our early warning system.
Yeah.
So when I'm sleeping under a tree or I'm sleeping in a bush, and the only thing that will warn me is my hearing.
Correct.
Because if there's a wild animal nearby,
Yeah.
or if there's this thing nearby, I will take evasive action. I will get up because my ears have warned me, my hearing has warned me, there is something around, it has alerted me.
Yeah.
Humans have a particular range which is limited. Dogs and animals have far better responses. Like dogs, like our hearing range is between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, average. And for a dog, it is above 40 kilohertz. So they can perceive sounds much better and much quicker than us, therefore much quicker than us. So a lot of things we kind of say sixth sense, we see this, that, but there are you can make out from the reaction of your pet, whether it's a dog or a cat, whether it's an earthquake or something, they start panicking because they hear frequencies which we don't. Maybe they hear the rumble of the earth that we don't. So we have a limited hearing, but our evolution is designed because in such a way that it is enough to understand what creatures are sounding, our language, our talk, our expressions. So this is how we are designed. Now coming back to the layers of sound that we are hearing, our brain behaves like a mixer. Like when both of us are talking, then even if there's a car passes by with a lot of noise, or if there are people shouting, or there's a crowd shouting, our brain shuts that down.
Ignore it.
And it is allowing me to concentrate on what you are speaking or what I am speaking. So it has shut out all the effects, and it is
Selective listening.
Selectively, it is because you are giving me information. So this thought process mein kya hota hai, when I talk to you, you talk to me, then we are interacting over a certain thing. Now in a normal thought process, what happens is all the other sounds are there, but it is there. Now we don't realize that if these sounds are not there, then we will find something missing. Then that is going to be a very unusual thing. That is going to make you very uncomfortable. But these are sounds which are there and therefore taken for granted. So a lot of people realize that for them sound is only dialogues and the background music that comes in, because the background music controls the emotion. Yeah. Like if I'm sad, there'll be a sad violin playing, or if I'm very happy, there'll be a nice plonky, honky-tonk piano which will play behind. So these are moods that music elevates in this thing. That if you want me to feel, if you want the audience to what I am thinking, the best and the easiest way to relate that is with music. So then that music, because people relate to music and subconsciously they relate to music. Like what happens is, I'll tell you, if it's a very low bass kind of chord or a low bass kind of note, then what happens is people suddenly become tense. I've seen that even with babies. I mean, it's not that films have conditioned us to react to a certain kind of music for horror, certain kind of music for romance, certain kind of this thing, but it is inherent in us. So when my child was very small, there was some very dark kind of music playing, he suddenly stopped what he's playing and he turned around and started looking at the TV. I switched off the TV because that was you realize that that was triggering off some kind of a fear emotion in him. So this is how it plays on our mind. This is how we perceive things. So it is very obvious. The dialogue and the music, reaction to dialogue and the music is very obvious. So when people come and talk to you, they don't know what a sound designer is. I get complimented for good background music.
Correct.
So background music for them can be the music that is playing and the explosion and the gunshots and the gunfire and the war sequence or the horses riding. So all that together for them is BGM, background music.
Correct.
So I've even received offers. Can you do the background music for my film? So people do not understand that. So basically sound design is all the sounds that you hear, which is non-musical. But there is a very fine line. There's a very fine line because what happens is, according to me, there should not be you should not know when the music is coming in and when the sound has come and when the music is gone off or when the sound design has gone off. So it depends entirely on the film, the director's sensibility, your sensibility as a sound designer. So all this put together, we kind of create the soundscape of the film. And we are trying to simulate this through our equipment. You're trying to simulate it through your camera. You're trying to simulate certain moods with your lighting and your camera. So we are trying to do that with sound. But lighting दिखता है, जो दिखता है वो बिकता है. But sound is something which even
actor बिकता है.
Actor बिकता है. Actor दिखता है इसलिए बिकता है.
Not even lighting.
Not even. But आपकी वजह से और बिकता है. So, and they are, of course, some of the actors are very serious about their sounds also. Apart from the looks, there are a lot of, we know that the cameraman and the actor have a relationship forever. But a lot of people are becoming
conscious.
A lot of actors are becoming very conscious about how their voices are. So I do have like one or two instances where the actors have called or this thinking, how is my voice sounding and how should I go about it, because my character plays this emotion and that particular character probably does not have such a nice voice or a deep voice, so he is a little worried ki I have this high kind of voice but I have to have this, I'm playing this very atonal, non-emotional kind of a tone I have to talk in and I need to go soft because loud mein aayega nahi, I will sound very screechy. So I give him options that okay, you do it and then we will take an on-the-spot dub so that, we'll try and work towards that. Yeah. So there is an exchange where they are very, some of the actors are very conscious about how
so
they are.
when you are talking about when you close your eyes and you listen to a landscape of sound around you, you in sound design actually create that landscape, which has to be created apart from the dialogue. This soundscape you created with small elements of sound. Yeah. And if I say that you choose those elements, what should be there and what need not be there, what would create a particular ambience and what wouldn't create, or what would create a different kind of ambience. So there is a very conscious selection of what kind of sound needs to be there in that ambience. Yes. Right?
There are these layers of sound that are there. So there are these obvious sounds which are you have to make in your, you have to create. We call them tracks. So there are hundreds. I have at least 500 to 600 tracks playing all the time in my, Earlier we used to have an issue. Back in the day there were like 4 tracks, 8 tracks. Yeah. That was luxury. Then we switched to in analog. We had 24 tracks, which was like, luxury and things like that. But with digital, we have like files and we have like tracks in equivalent of, today we have an equivalent of 2,500 tracks.
You can play together.
On my Pro Tools, yeah.
Wow.
So, of course, we don't use that much unless it's a really elaborate thing. But that is, now tracks is not an issue.
But even 600 is a huge amount.
It is a huge amount, yeah. So there are layers, there are ambient sounds. So there are various kinds of ambient sounds. How you're going to lay those particular sounds depends, of course, entirely on the film. There are atmospheric sounds, there are traffic sounds, there are room tone kind of sounds, and then there are other sounds like, birds, bees, and stuff like that. Then there are weather kind of sounds like rains, thunders, wind, those kind of things. Then there are incidental sounds like, car doors closing or things falling or rocks falling. And then footsteps, that is what we call Foley or artificially created sound effects. uh, which are created with the picture. So recreated with the picture. Because what happens is when the person is walking and he's talking, so you will get the dialogue, but then you don't get his footsteps.
Right.
So we see what is the floor that he's walking on. So is he walking on a wooden floor or a cement floor or a carpeted floor? So in the Foley we try to recreate that. There's a Foley artist who
I'm coming to that at
Yeah.
some point. Yeah.
So there is a whole chapter of Foley where we capture these kind of sounds, on screen kind of sounds. Then these are diegetic sounds. These are sounds which are there on the film, which are like real sounds. And then there are sounds which you create in order to define space or a mood. Like suppose you're taking a mid shot of mine. Now, if you're taking a mid shot of mine, I'm sitting in this particular room with a blank background. Now, with my soundtrack, I can make it sound like I'm sitting in a railway station waiting for a train. So I have the train sounds, I have announcements of this thing. What are the sounds that you hear in a railway station? You hear people shouting, you hear the coolie, you hear the vendor, you hear all these. There's a whole gamut of sounds which happen and which defines the geography of the place. So I've just taken a mid shot and I've added the sound and I've shown that you are sitting in a railway station.
Okay.
Similarly, if I take away that sound,
That doesn't necessarily be realistic also.
no, it is not realistic. For example,
No, even if you get into a character's mind,
yeah.
the sound could come from there, not
Yeah.
necessarily from the physical reality of it.
There are two things. That's what I was saying. One is the defining the geography. Now, this is how we define geography. Like you have taken a mid close of mind, you've added that this thing. Similarly, I can with the sound, you can make me feel like make it seem like I'm sitting next to the seashore. I can hear the seagulls. I can hear sea waves. I can hear the ship's horn. So just by looking at it, people will correlate. The audience will correlate, okay, this is the person sitting and these are the sounds. And the audience, because there's a constant justification in the mind of the audience, they are looking at why what is this sound? So you don't have to take the character out to a sea beach to show him that.
Correct.
That is the physicality of the
of it,
thing,
yeah.
the space.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is the thought. Now, what do you do? What do you get into the character's mind? Now, suppose the character is sitting in a very contemplative expression on his face and he's probably thinking about something. With music, it becomes easy. You see, there is one thing called nostalgia. Now, all of us know that there is some kind of a melody that we have heard as a child. Either my mother was singing it, or or they used to hear something on the radio. Now, if that song plays today, it will take me back.
Correct.
To that time zone, to that time era, to my childhood. This is what we call nostalgia. So music it is very easy to do that. But sounds also have this. Like when I was a child, we were in Bihar and there was a meter gauge railway. There were no elaborate buses, but from village to village, there was a choti line, they used to call it, which connected this. And it was a small, a little better than a kind of a toy train.
Yeah.
Service that used to happen between the towns. Unfortunately, they shut it down because it was running in a loss, and there were better buses and public transport started evolving. But that we used to run up at our grandparents' place. We used to run up to the terrace to watch this because you could hear that thing. And many of our films, especially the Bengali films like Pather Panchali and all, have kind of nailed it. But that is what the Indian middle class always related to was the railway sounds, the sounds of the railway station, the sounds of the steam engine. In our generation, the steam engine was still there. So that particular thing had a peculiar sound. And if somebody played that sound, then it will automatically, I will start connecting with my childhood. So these are things that you will put in the soundtrack to make him, to give the impression that he's in a कुछ introspection हो रहा है या he's in a nostalgic mood or he's recalling in the childhood. Or you can give some other sounds which like in a film like Madras Cafe I had done this particular sequence where there's a scene where there's a hill station, there's a chopper flying, a regular helicopter flying and all that. So that John Abraham is lying down and he's having a very uncomfortable dream because he's gone into drinking, and he's an ex-intelligence officer, and he's retired from that. But there is something that keeps haunting him. So how do I get that dream back into this thing? So I took off from that chopper, and it shows a distance, helicopter at a distance and all that. And suddenly I had this huge, there's a whole helicopter that just comes and flies very close to your roof. And he wakes up with a start, and there's a ceiling fan which is also running. So that kind of, it breaks from, when we hear something in our sleep, we don't know, it's garbled and stuff like that. But even the basic alarm clock, we hear something, it sounds like a fire alarm, it sounds like whatever you're dreaming at that point, and then you wake up to an alarm clock and you come back to reality. So that is the kind of effect I tried to create with this guy's dream, which was an uncomfortable dream, and he had this what we call PTSD now. So he wakes up to that. So this is how you interpret that person's state of mind.
Correct.
Then there's a scene where there's an explosion, for example. Now, if there is an explosion of that magnitude, we will all get disoriented. Suddenly we lose our bearing. Or if we are in a state of shock, if somebody comes and tells you that, so-and-so very close to you has expired. So a lot of people react with shock. And then the guy next to you is trying to console you and say, don't worry, we'll take the next flight, or we will, we should get ready. So all these become sounds. Then whatever he's talking does not make sense because our mind is in a state of shock.
Yeah.
So these are things that you are creating by, I can add reverbs to it, I can add some kind of sounds. My perception is completely distorted. So which is otherwise a very soft sound, like a far off distant horn. I'll make that so loud that it is very disturbing. So that is a way of showing that I am creating a lot of disturbance in his mind, and there is no just hearing perception is completely distorted. So this is one state of mind that you can do with
the logic
sound.
of realism. You distort completely. And
completely, yes. At that moment, because now how do I relate to the audience without dialogue, without music, that I'm in a state of disturb. Of course, there's a lot of acting in that. But how does that, what is he thinking?
Right.
It's very easy to put in a dialogue and say that,
correct,
मैं तुमको miss कर रहा हूँ.
Yeah. There is a line which I keep repeating in my videos, is that every element of filmmaking needs to do one main thing, that is storytelling.
Correct.
So that's that, whether it is camera, whether it is sound, whether it is art direction, whether it is acting,
Yeah.
Every element, scripting, every element has to do one important thing, that is storytelling. You cannot take sound or camera or even art direction away from that. Make that storytelling is most important.
Yes. Because what happens is, like, when you're reading a novel, everything is described. Now, in films, we don't have to describe all that. Yeah. People are seeing it. Yeah. What is the color of the shirt you're wearing? What is the color of your hair? What is the, what is the situation you're sitting in? Are you drunk? The bottle itself or this thing itself will show that you have been drinking. Yeah. So these are things that you can show without dialogue. There is no need to explain everything with dialogue or a song. So there are a lot of these things and have become very subtle now compared to
unfortunately, I would say probably 70% of our films depend heavily on dialogue and nothing else. Generally, I'm saying. Culturally,
that's how we are. Culturally, that's how we are. Everything is, and we are a loud people. I have another theory for that. We are a very loud people. Because we are screaming on top of our heads. And I attribute that to our climate, by the way. Because what happens is, if you go in the West, winter mein cricket bhi nahi bolta sala. Even the crickets pack up. They kind of disappear. So there is total silence. And even when you go to their houses in Europe or in these cold countries, their houses are insulated,
sealed,
with glass wool and wood for thermal reasons. But it also acoustically does a great job of isolating yourself from the rest outside world.
You can't have traffic coming in.
And the traffic, they are very quiet. The engines are quiet. There's hardly any horn. So the tendency of a normal European or an American is to speak very softly.
Is that,
In complete contrast to what is happening now. Suppose I am a regular middle class guy who's staying near the railway station on the road. My window is constantly open because I cannot have an air conditioner. I cannot afford an air conditioner. I cannot have an air conditioner all the time. So I have to keep my window open. The fan which is running is at least 45 to 50 decibels uska sound hai. The entire auto rickshaw community, the hawkers, everything has come into my living room. And in my living room, it is a tiled floor or a marble floor or a granite floor, reflective walls. So the thing becomes, the sound keeps reflecting. And there's a goonj aata hai, so it becomes louder. And because our bass noise is so loud, the family members are, grandma is watching television, which is because she can't hear very well, the volume is very loud. The kids are playing, they're screaming at each other, mother is screaming at the kids. And if I have to talk to you like that, I'm screaming at you and you're screaming at me. So this has made us a loud people. So when we go into the theatre, our volume is exceptionally loud because that kind of moves us, and that for us that becomes drama. We have not moved out of our old Nautanki concepts.
Even our happiness, our festivals are the drums
Extremely
and the doors.
loud. We are like, we are there. Sound-wise, it just goes beyond every red level.
Patakas, all that.
Diwali again becomes a loud affair.
They don't have it. Europe doesn't have all this.
Yeah. So therefore we are a loud people. We are this thing. So yes.
No, loudness I understand. But
And also
over-dependence of dialogue is what I was saying.
See, dependence on dialogue comes from, in all this, I cannot catch the subtlety in your expression or in your dialogue. So you have to actually spell it out to me, what you're thinking and for me. And also we make this very big mistake of underestimating the intelligence of the audience. You have to underline everything and justify everything over there so that, अरे भाई उसको सब समझ में आता है. Do not underestimate.
Spoon feed.
Yes, he's probably he comes from a very poor background, or he comes from this thing, but he's or deprived kind of a background. But he's not stupid. Don't underestimate his intelligence, because the constant thing is auto rickshaw wale ko nahi samjhega. So we have to underline these dialogues. And I'm like,
that's a very funny line.
And auto rickshaw wale nahi samjhega. Why are you underestimating his intelligence? And this is a very classist kind of a thing. And he's dealing with 500 people a day. He's much smarter than you. Even when he looks at your face, he knows where you're going to go, how you're going to talk, and where you're going to
See, that all come from our casteism, actually.
Yeah. We are very caste conscious, and we assume that this guy will not understand.
He's lower than me, that is why. That's there.
So these kind of sensibilities bring down everything, and then you start playing to that. And then what happens is constantly you start playing to that when people don't have a choice. And then you say, "Yehi sab cheez chalta hai." Nahi chalta hai. When you worked in Munna Bhai MBBS, when Raju made Munna Bhai MBBS, it was not some film that jo chalta hai. It was something very new, and people loved it. I remember there was a small worry that these guys had. Ki will people in Bihar understand this Bombay lingo? It became doubly popular in this thing. People in Bihar started speaking in that Bombay lingo. So do not underestimate the audience. And whatever new you throw into the market, people will love it.
Definitely. So now you came into this scenario sometime late 80s when we passed out of the institute and came into that. From there, if I say from 90s to present day, you have been 35 years, man. It's a long time. And
more.
I have seen the evolution of cinema from that period to today. It's a very long journey.
Yes.
So how do you see the shift which has happened from 90s to today?
I consider our generation to be very lucky. When we trained at FTI, we were training in analog equipment, which is completely different from what we have today. our course was sound recording and sound engineering, because we were supposed to know circuitry, we were supposed to know the electronics, we were supposed to know, because if something went out, troubleshooting you should not depend on others. So we were dealing with these huge Magnatech recorders, Sondor recorders, and those kind of, expensive, very elaborate machines, some Westrex machines, which were dying out back in the day. But in our time, it was more these German machines were coming in. They were, and it was very big, very elaborate, very sturdy, but very limited in terms of flexibility, in terms of tracks and stuff like that. Also, it was very different back in the day, because the soundscape or the soundtrack, designing the soundtrack was actually the editor's job, or the editing department's job.
Oh.
So the editors would actually lay those tracks, and the guy who sat and actually mixed the film, he was the guy who was sitting and actually refining the whole sound process, which is why the mixing engineer became like the go-to person to solve all your sound problems.
No designing aspect.
No designing aspect, because he was just rectifying what was there. Because the guys barring a few good editors like Renu Saluja and all that, who brought in that sensibility, and we all look up to her. Whether it's editors, of course, she was the goddess for the editors, and for us also, we looked up to her because of her refined sensibilities and her way of working. So there were people who would lay tracks like traffic hai to traffic ka track loop dal diya. Sometimes the loop would play in reverse, which they did not know, and it would be a huge scene in the mixing theater. Kuch traffic ka loop dal diya. So it was just filling in the blanks. There was no design aspect. They were just filling in sound.
A lot of the films I remember, when a car stops,
Yeah.
it abruptly the sound goes off. It's not. There's no slowing down.
There was no stay.
There's no stay.
So there were a lot of things, a lot of limitations back in the day, and so these sounds were laid by the sound editor. So the sound recordist was actually in charge of because we never did sync sound. In somewhere after the 50s and the 60s, we lost the sync sound process, and we went into dubbing. Yeah. Because then portable magnetic recorders had come in, spool recorders had come in, and they knew that we could dub that. So that whole dubbing facility became much easier because of our noisy environment and the way the cameras need not be blimped. So even if the camera is making a racket, it did not matter, because anyway we are going to dub the dialogue. So therefore in the 80s, 90s, even 70s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you would find this loud kind of voice, and it sounds so fake and dubbed by today's standards. So
this multi-track kind of adding an ambience into the track, if you look at the 60s cinema, it was not there much.
No, what was happening was, first of all, there was just a single mono-track recording. So there were tracks, there were other things playing, but we were mixing it down to one track. But there were only tracks which were necessary. Like if there was a thunder lightning loop would happen, if there was a thunder and lightning, there would be dialogue, and there would be a little rain ka sound. And there was some night where there would be some cricket sound or some dogs barking. So very minimalistic, but it kind of gave the thing. And mostly it was music and dialogue again.
Correct.
Also, our reproduction systems were not very elaborate. We had mono optical sound, which had a very narrow range, dynamic range. So it was hardly a 30 dB dynamic range, which was like, it was like, suppose this cup can hold 200 ml. Now you can't put a liter of water in this, it will overflow. It will overflow.
Yeah.
So you could only fit in this much. So isme kya aata tha, the dialogues would come very well, and some music and some songs would come very well. But the absolute low frequency, the bass, all that was not there. The absolute high frequencies were not there. So the main thing that was there were the dialogues. And people were looking, as long as the dialogue was clear, people were happy making the film, people were happy watching the film. Yeah. That was the thing. But slowly what happened over a period of time, then Dolby came in and surround sound started happening. It started happening much slower in film. In music, of course, stereo and all had started by the 60s already. They were doing, and even in our music industry in India also, we broke into stereo and stuff like that. But it took a much longer time to move away from mono sound in cinema.
So all these actually limited the importance to the actors and the dialogue and the literary aspect of cinema, I call it. it limited to that. The rest of the things, elements of cinema, whether it is picture or sound or other things, were not explored because of the technical limitations which it had probably, which we
Also.
still continue.
Yes. See, a lot of it also had to do with technology because there was no need. When Alamara was being made, the first feature film, first talkie that was made, they realized that, when sound came, it came with its share of problems. So it came with a baggage. And they realized that, boss, it's not just the dialogue, but it's capturing a lot of other stuff. So they had marked a place near a railway yard where they would record. Then they didn't realize that the train would be much louder than the dialogue. So in the night between, say, maybe 12 to, say, 3 or 4 in the morning, they had 3 to 4 hours of silence. Silence as in no trains traveling.
Yeah.
So that's when they used to shoot. But because there was no concept of soundproofing.
Correct.
All these came, necessity is the mother of invention. So all these things came much later, that you can work even in a...
But that's not the way Hollywood worked, even those years.
Hollywood was much more evolved. Much more evolved in terms of sound. You see,
Every technical aspect.
every technical aspect, but I don't say that we were too far behind because of our colonial background. Cinema started almost the same time as the West.
Yeah.
Like today, digital started, we were at par with the West, we started. So the problems I'm facing with the digital, the problems I started facing with the digital was not unique to India. It was unique to even a guy sitting in the US.
Right.
He's having the same kind of issues. So then the forums came up. Then these companies like Avid and Pro Tools and all, they came up with these forums where everybody could share their problems. And now it is a cross
Kind of
thing. So that time when film was there, then we took a different path because of our history, because of the theatrical way, the Nautanki, the dramas, our films were also made like that. Even their films were made, but they started evolving much more. Faster.
I'm saying each element of cinema there, it evolved parallelly as different art forms.
Yes.
Somewhere we didn't do that. We were
We
limited.
had a good start, but we got stuck in this groove. We got stuck in that thing. We did not experiment. We did not experiment with cinema. We just copied, and it sadly still continues today.
We didn't give much value to the other contributors.
Yeah. So today, when the technology has become better, I can hear every sound. So therefore, the sound designer has got much more to play around with. So if you're telling me how was it back then, it was good when it lasted. The analog days and the limitations that we worked under. Today, I'm one of the happiest guys because I can concentrate on the program and not the mechanics of it. So if I'm sitting there and I know that, okay, I can fix this, or if there's a thing, I can do this particular thing, I know it will be easy. So I'm having a great time. I'm the only thing that is stopping me is the imagination of a very rigid commercial mentality.
So what was the period of crossing over from analog to digital? It was a space of learning. It was a space of not understanding. There are a lot of issues which came, during that learning curve was different.
So when we started moving to digital, we theoretically, of course, in FTI we understood what MIDI was. It was still a theory for us. MIDI is musical instruments digital interface. So that is a thing that locked musical instruments together. Today also MIDI is used in very complex ways to create tracks and stuff like that in music especially. So when we came to Bombay in the late 80s, early 90s, then we found that MIDI was already being used by musicians. I was locking the musicians were locking their electronic instruments with MIDI, and I was locking my recorder with them. So the whole process had started evolving. But the recording was still analog. And then slowly we transformed from analog to tape-based digital. Like ADAT started coming in, Hi-8 started coming in, DAT tapes started coming in. But it was still linear. The non-linearity started evolving somewhere around, in India, around mid-90s, early mid-90s. And by late 90s, everybody was shifting more towards the digital thing because the digital resolutions in terms of sound was getting better and better. Today I don't miss analog because the digital has come to a stage where the resolutions are so nice. I don't miss it. And there are certain things which will always be analog. Like our speech is analog. This microphone is analog. This whole process of me and your listening eventually on the speakers is an analog process. But now this whole recording does not depend on the medium, which was such a headache for us.
Yeah.
The tape had noise, his noise. The opticals had his noise. Now we are just encoding on that on a particular
Data.
medium. So today with the computers coming in, we have become the nonlinearity has really helped. Because I remember in the late 90s, when the Avid in the broadcast exhibition, there used to be these broadcast exhibition, and Avid came as a revelation to me. I sat the whole day on the Avid machine to understand what digital editing was. And that's when it occurred to you that, you could it was so much more flexible. The whole nonlinearity really stumped me.
Yeah.
That you could do this, you could do that also. And similarly in audio, you could do this, you could do that, you could undo. Editing, undo was like a godsend.
Yeah.
Because we used to cut music, like,
Correct.
classical music recording. Ustadji would sing for hours on end. Now you had to edit the whole thing and bring it down to 1 hour, because side A was 30 minutes, side B was 30 minutes. So you had to edit it, and that edit was not like a random edit. You had to make sure that the repetitions were cut and that the whole structure of the song was not disturbed.
You need to understand music to do that.
To understand music to do that. So your creativeness, your creative involvement as a sound engineer became far more complex. Because it was not just, back in the day, it was a very technical thing. They would hit the red button and they would monitor all the other this thing. So it became like a laboratory procedure. But slowly over a period of time, what happened is it became a more creative process. When our generation started coming in, because we had all this thing, but we were thinking different. We were thinking that, I need to put this sound. I need to make this particular thing. I need to add this. I need to understand the music in order to take away all the technical headache from the music director.
Yeah.
So, after FTI, I went actually into music recording because it is my main interest in music that got me into this industry. The industry found me. People say that how did you choose this profession? I say that profession chose me. So I was probably moving in this direction.
Yeah.
So anyway, what happened was then you started becoming more involved in the whole creative process, in the recording, the kind of tone it would set, the kind of issues you would face when you're mixing and editing. So these sort of things came. So when you're cutting down the whole process down to, from an elaborate thing to 1 hour, it was a creative process. You had to make sure that, you did not miss out any antra or any valuable stanza on the thing. So you had to do it in such a way that it would not offend the classical artist, or it would not disturb the music. So classical was far more difficult. Of course, film, music and pop and all were relatively much easier. But we had to physically cut tapes at the end of the day. Now that problem, when the computer happened and I could realize that if the edit went wrong, I could hit that undo button.
Yeah.
I was the happiest guy on that day.
Yeah. Stress.
So it was completely de-stressed. Even today, I am very de-stressed about it. You have not lost anything.
Fear of losing.
Fear of losing is not there. The boundaries are not
But
there.
still there. The data can disappear.
No, we have, there are very less chances if you have 2-3 backups of that. Very less chances that all of them will crash at the
You
same
need a
time.
different discipline too.
You need a completely different. So our discipline back in the day was different from the discipline that we are doing today.
Yeah.
Back in the day, we had to punch in at a particular point and punch out at a particular point. Because if I'm recording on a track, now if this, I'm limited in terms of the tracks. So this particular track had flute. Now the next instrument over here is going to be the saxophone. And after that is going to be the trumpet.
Yeah.
Now the flute guy has played and he's gone. Now the sax I'll have to dub on the same track because I don't have any other track. So I have to make sure that I hit the right spot so that the flute does not get erased and the sax, I don't miss the first notes of the sax. So it was a very crucial punch. And then I had to punch out because uske baad trumpet hai. Now the trumpet guy has gone to some other country. The flute guy has gone to perform from Bombay, he's gone to Chennai to perform. So I'm not going to get those guys around.
Yeah.
And to get them back to play, so it required a tremendous amount of discipline and experience that you had to punch at a certain beat and you had to punch out at a certain beat.
Correct.
And usme bhi there was a slippage because there was a space between the record and the playback head. So you had to unmusically punch in and punch out, So you had to be very good at those kind of things. So today that is not a problem because from the time you start rolling your recording, even if you punch late, you can go back and
pull it back.
including even if you punch out early, as long as the thing is moving, you can still drag. So it has made me lazy. But at the same time, वो tension मेरा निकल गया. So similarly, this is a simple example that I gave, but similarly there are a lot of other things that we can do. There are innumerable plugins, softwares that have come, has made our life so much more easier. I'm so happy that Sync Sound has come back, that, as an actor, whatever you're performing, I'm able to capture, and I've got complex softwares to clean up the whole process so that, I get a very nice sound. I'm so glad that we have come
And
to a
the
very
music
good place.
recording, from the place you had 20 violins and 10 percussion instruments and all sitting together in a huge hall and recording it through dozens of mics and all that has collapsed into this kind of a room where the recording is happening.
That is a sad part. There are two things that are not happening these days. Because I was actually on social media, I was talking to somebody. Back in the day, there was an interaction. Because every studio, whichever studio you walked in, you met some singer, some musician, some music director, some producer, some director. And that was the case with everybody, or some technician. So there was a constant interaction, human interaction. So, and jate you said that Sonu, you might get a call tomorrow for a recording. It was not so complex that I have to call up your manager and then get a date from him, and so I could just. But those things, formalities would be there.
Yeah.
But at least I got the message across. Yeah. You got to meet a director or a producer, and they would say, "Oh, what are you doing tomorrow? Why don't you come? We need it." So it was that organic. Today, what has happened is we have become very fragmented. So, very sadly, what has happened is Bombay had a very nice violin section, very nice percussion section. Their children did not come back because it was years of experience, years of riyaz before you became a very good musician.
Yeah.
And when you became a very good musician, there was no pay. You were not paid well enough. So, the next generation lost interest. They either took up electronic music or they left the industry altogether. The next generation did not come in. So our string section dwindled
Completely.
And today,
and the whole thing of you could multiply three violins into 30.
You could do that. You could do that. But now our perception, our hearing has also got much more sophisticated. The sound that you would get of, say, 30 violins playing together in a room, you cannot, whatever you say, I get 10 violins and make them play 3 times. I will not get that effect of 30 violins. I have to artificially simulate it. I can get close to it. But I will not be able to get that because you need those irregularities also. You need that human error also. So and that gets minimized in lesser number of people, with lesser number of people. So sadly today what is happening is in most orchestra kind of films where you need strings and because Chennai also had the South had a very good string section. They have also disappeared, are dwindling. So people it's cheaper for them to go and record strings in places like Macedonia, in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. London, of course, is
culture
expensive.
still there.
It is still there. See, even John Williams,
Irrespective of their film also went into electronics,
For us, it becomes a budget issue, an investment issue. Yeah. I would also love to have analog machines in my studio, but I will not be able to afford it. Today, if you want to develop a film, there is no laboratory. But in the West, they have not shut out that thing.
This is not budget. I disagree with that. It's not budget. It's an attitude. We don't need it kind of a thing.
That's the thing. You see, when people realize that we can the string section we can get. We've got like VSTs which are giving you very good sounds. I don't need the violin guys to play because the producer is like, "Boss, we have this. Why do we?" Because he does not understand.
Does not understand.
So, and mostly the producers are the guys who are taking the call, which is far from aesthetic. And unfortunately, many of the producers. There are some who are very good and who kind of encourage that, but unfortunately, they are like 1 in 100 or 2 in 100. But that sensibility or that conviction is definitely not there because they are looking at the amount of money they are going to put in and how much they are going to come back. When they design post-production, they have, say, they give you 6 months or 1 year, max. if you give them 2 years, the VFX itself is going to take so much time to render. We have not got instant rendering yet, so it takes that much of time to render. So jitna aap time doge, even in sound, in terms of creating and bringing it down to exactly what you are looking at.
It's a question of planning. Like we don't have planning at all in our film industry.
It is not just planning. It is why I'm saying it's finance is because the guy who is putting in the money, whether if you are going to say that postpone your release date by another 6 months, he's going to see, because 6 months later the returns will be the same.
Yeah.
He will lose the interest of those 6 months.
Correct.
or the 1 year jitna time aapne delay kiya.
But if you have good planning, then you don't need to push it. You have it. But here the films start on a whim, and it's not that you have any kind of
That's another story. But what I'm saying is, even when they are doing the thing, even when they realize that ek to unrealistic release date, and they will go on shooting. That's number one. Number two is they don't consider it. They are happy with whatever ordinary VFX work comes out. They said, "Yaar, ye chal jayega." Ye chalta hai wala jo
what I was
scene hai
saying,
na,
attitude. No?
that attitude definitely is killing us.
That is the main
So
issue.
we know that there is no ending in the creative process. Like you abandon your film and those kind of things. But there is a process which, I mean, you have to give it that much of time.
Yeah.
You cannot say I can drive to Pune in 3 hours. Maybe I can 2.5 hours, but I can't drive to Pune
In 5
in
minutes.
1 hour, 5 minutes. Now that is an unrealistic deadline you're putting, or I abandon, or I don't do the things, and therefore I land up with average work.
Correct.
So these are things that we need to strike a balance.
Somewhere we need to learn filmmaking in a different way. Which is,
And it's not that money is not there.
it's not
It
that,
is just
that's what I'm saying. It's never money.
it's not that money is not there for sound, but the way they used to budget for sound in 80s and 90s is the same way they budget, because sound mein itna, you don't realize the work has increased 350 times, and everything is heard, and again you are underestimating the audience that usko samjhega nahi.
The director was asking me, like, I mean, even after so much of development in digital and all that, you takes the same time to light up. So I said, even after computers and all came in, you take the same time to write a script, right? So it's not the technology which
It's your thought process.
It's your thought process. I have to stand on a set and think about like what I'm going to do. Like I have very limited time to do it. So that is the stress I'm taking. I'm doing it. So it needs a minimum time. Without that, you can't present something which is good.
Similarly, there was a producer who had come, and we had just, the automation on the mixer had started. Physically, we used to fader up, down karo, mute karo. So physically we used to do that. Then the automation came in, where the computer is doing that for you. So what is happening is, between words you could, before the non-linear workstations came in, the tape was running and the automated mixer was running. So you could automate everything to us. The guy came and says, "Wow, we can, our mixing time is cut." I said, "No. Because now what is going to happen is, you're going to do 300 rehearsals and you'll get one perfect take. Because you will run it 300 times till because you've got the possibility of doing fine-tuning it even more. You will spend that much of time. And then it won't matter to you. So it will take you longer to do that because you simply have the facility.
He would even say that the mixer is doing automatically. Why do you need that guy?
Correct. There are people who are doing that. And AI probably is going to do that now.
Correct. So you need a brain behind it.
You need AI you need a brain behind that also.
You got into music actually in a big way, I remember. Spectral harmony and all that. So from there, you shifted to movies at some point. Why was it?
See, what the challenge that most sound people face after coming out of FTI, because we train with everything. We are doing location sound, we are doing mixing, we are doing sound editing, we are doing music recording, we are doing mixing. So we are doing all that. So when you come out, there are people who are coming out, and in our generation it was like, either you get into dubbing, or you get into film mixing, or you get into music recording, or you get into, for sound people, there was another option of getting into maintenance and the technical side of the whole thing. But I was very clear that I wanted to get into song and music recording, because that itself I felt, because in our 3 years of training, I felt that as a technician, the place where I can really exploit my knowledge to the T is in music, because you're dealing with from the highest frequency to the lowest frequency, and there was a whole fun in the whole process in mixing the thing, and your hearing, daily your recording and your hearing has become far more you're tuned in, it became more accurate. You became a lot more sensitive towards musical notes, towards music. As a technician, as a sound engineer, I'm saying that, tonality, understanding your studio, walking into a room and realizing what the room is going to sound like. Like we were talking about the liveliness of this particular room. So these are things that, as a music engineer, I became much more perceptive to the acoustics around me, which is so important. So a person who has done music or who is an understander of music will understand this far better, even if he's not recording music anymore or if he's doing other stuff in sound. And even in other art forms, even as a director, even as a cinematographer, as an editor, if you have a good understanding of music, your work will reflect that.
Yeah.
Because the way you move your camera, the way you cut in rhythm, the way the director perceives it with something in his mind. I have found in my experience, people who have a good understanding of music, I'm not saying be musicians. Musician ho gaya to bahut acha hai. That's a very good thing. So, if you have a very good understanding of music, your overall interpretation of your films is going to be far better than somebody who is oblivious to it.
I say that about camera work also,
Yes.
for a cinematographer also. I said, you have to have music inside you,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't sing to save my life.
Yeah.
But I said, it is like I have a rhythm in me. I understand the rhythm.
Yeah.
When I'm walking, or if it's a handheld, or if it's any kind of movement, or even a static shot, there is a rhythm within that, which is the basics of
Which
cinema.
is very subtle but very important.
Yeah.
And this happens like, when you're doing the score, background score, you realize the way the camera is moving, the speed at which the camera is moving, that helps the edit, that helps the sound, that helps the music.
Yeah.
So it's a process. So coming back to my deviating from music, because my last project I worked on as a studio employee, as a sound engineer hired by a studio and working in a recording studio. My last project was Devdas. After that, I started freelancing and I went into sound design in a big way. The reason for that was I realized that normally when we used to record a film song, it would take about 10 to 15 days. So the song was, of course the composer would come with a song in mind, but by the time he came to the studio and with shared it with the rest of the musicians, the producer, the technicians, everybody would stand, then they would program the song. There would be rehearsals on the song, they would program the song. Then there would be live recording of the song. So when the process of programming the song itself, you were a part of that creative process of creating a particular sound. Yeah. Like they would say that, how is this tone or how is that tone? And you would say that, okay, wait, let me just tweak it a little. Or I would also put in my 2 bits of suggestions and I would say that, can we have this particular tone for this? Because both are playing at the same octave. A simplistic example would be, like, both are playing at the same octave. Would you want a higher inversion on the guitars, for example? And you have this in the mid section. So it was, I'm giving a simplistic example, but these are things that, you would also be involved in. So, and of course the whole live recording part of the thing, where you would sit and tune every, all the leather instruments, the percussions, all the tone of every tabla and every this thing, matching them, how it would go with the bass, and how you would ask the guys to detune the dagga, the baya, to make sure that both are rounded and this sounded a good thick, so you got a good wall of, thick Indian percussions. So those kind of things it was a whole creative process, because you were standing there and we were all a party to it. Right. And everybody had their contribution in the whole thing. Right from the conceptualization to the final mix. I was involved as a music engineer in the whole thing. Then slowly, when the technology changed, everything became fragmented. Then the guys who were programming, the guys who were programming came out with studios with, very good equipment, because the computer made it possible. For me also today, to afford a studio, I have a studio and I have like more than one studio. I could afford that because of the computer, because of the workstation. So, and there were sophisticated speakers and professional speakers and all that. So everybody today is affording this. So the guy who's programming it, he also has a very good refined knowledge of sound. So my involvement as a music engineer became very limited, and it became so fragmented that so and so is, he's programming the music over there. Then you're doing the dubbing over there. Then somebody else is doing the mixing. Somebody else is doing the mastering. So it got scattered.
Okay.
So I didn't want to be involved only with say
One
one
aspect.
music director with one aspect of the whole process. So I realized, man, that was not the driving force, but at one point I realized that my involvement in the whole process is getting diminished. And not just that, I was beginning to, in Devdas itself, I was beginning to discover, how in design I can contribute in terms of this thing. So while doing the background itself, I ended up doing a lot of sound design work also in that. And then I realized that I wanted to shift into design because music is something which I've still not left. I still record music, mix songs and stuff like that. But I've moved more or less away. So people today know me more as a sound designer than a music engineer.
There's more opportunities to do it and to work.
Yes, and it is like programming the soundtrack for an entire film.
Yeah. So how do you, where does it start?
Ideally, the process should start from me getting the script or the director telling me about the film first, and then the script comes along, and then you read the script and you make your notes. So that is always better because you also have films that are already shot and edited and then they come to you. The recent film was Chhawa, for example. Now Chhawa, they got me on board the film much later because they realized that their thing was like this is a big, huge period drama and you only can do justice to this. So I felt very, of course, every time people say something like that, you feel very good about yourself. So that is another way of doing it because it did not give me time to research so much on Sambhaji and stuff like that. But you kind of learn along the way, you do your bit of research along the way and you incorporate sounds which are there. Partly my working in such kind of period dramas, especially for Sanjay Bhansali films, has helped also. So in a way they were right. So I knew the kind of effect or the impact it would create if I added certain sounds, if I processed certain sounds. So what happens is like, there are films that land up after the edit and everything is done and then you're doing the sound design and then, there are those kind of films also. But I would prefer to be involved right in the start, right at the start. So Bajirao was one such example. And many films, like my first film in sound design was Ritu Parna Ghosh's Chokher Bali, where we had an extensive discussion. And very interestingly, Ritu saw Devdas and he said that, would you like to design the sound for my film? Because I was doing music recording most of the time. And I jumped at the idea because, there was no money. It was not for the money that you were doing it. It was a regional film. It was the first regional Bengali film in 5.1 surround, 5.1 Dolby surround. So that was another big trip. And Chokher Bali, based on a novel, and when you saw the film, and there also I kind of joined once the film was edited and stuff like that. But the whole process of the sound production was very interesting, which I will probably detail later. But coming back to, say, Bajirao, for example, when I was told that, when I was fixed that I would be working on Bajirao Mastani, then I knew about Bajirao Mastani, but I did not have so much of details in terms of the history of Bajirao. So the script was also had not come to me, but it was a story of Bajirao and Mastani. So I ordered for a random book from, it was not like, one particular book, or it was definitely not the book where their story was based on. But I needed to understand the characters, the data, and also I ordered a book from Amazon. I forgot who the author was, it doesn't matter. And I read the book. And that helped me understand the character, the story, the angst, the conflict, all that made me understand. The time period, 1700 something. So all these things helped a lot. And then I said that, okay, I am going to design sounds because it was a period film. Now in period film, what do you have in the soundtrack? How long can you have birds and forest sounds? So in a period film, what would be the atmospheric sound? That's a big challenge. That what would be the soundscape of a period film in those times?
Yeah.
So now Bajirao was from a Brahmin family because Peshwas were Brahmins. So Shivaji Maharaj had his empire was so big that he had to appoint governors. So these governors were called Peshwas, who were individually in charge of whatever province or region they were in. So Bajirao was one such governor who became so powerful as a king that he became a story and he became like a legendary figure. And though he comes from a strict Brahmin kind of family, he was very un-Brahminical in his ways. He was more of a Kshatriya. He fought, he ate non-veg, he drank, he fell in love with a Muslim woman. So these were something which were not expected of a Brahmin, and that was the conflict in his house because his house was a very orthodox Brahmin household. Now, when you're cutting to an orthodox Brahmin household, it would be surrounded. Apart from it was the stables were close by, so there were horses. There were, of course, there were peacocks and there were birds and those kind of things. But what would be a predominantly what should I say? Predominant sound in that whole process would be religious sounds mostly. So you would have temple bells and chants and mantras and shloks and stuff like that. So then I knew that there was some place in Maharashtra because somebody had mentioned somewhere and it kind of stuck in your subconscious that there was this place where Brahmins from all over Maharashtra would come and chant the Vedic chant. So there were some 25, 30 Brahmins who would congregate at some place and they would chant. So, and that happens once a year around July, August. And that was the time when we were doing the post-production. So I kind of asked the production guys to please find out and, look out for that. And luckily, they found out through this thing that there is a place near Panchgani called Y where this happens. So then we narrowed down to that thing and we realized that okay, this is the time and this is the ritual that happens. And then I went with my recording team and recorded the chant of the people. So I wanted to I didn't know where I would use it, but I wanted that chant because this Vedic chant and all would create a magical effect.
Actually, a couple of 100 years back, it used to happen in the same way probably,
Yeah. So now you had the option of, having these Vedic chants, but this story is based in Maharashtra. So I did not want, to go to Banaras and record chants. Or the South also has a definite tone, a very South kind of tone of pronunciation, the way they would, their meter would be set, the thing. That is very different. North will have a different thing. And Maharashtra had a very, like Sanskrit is something which most people in the north say. In West and India, they would say Sanskrit, for example. Yeah. So these are little things that, a Maharashtrian Brahmin chanting would, have this kind of a flavor, Maharashtrian flavor, if you call it that way. So I was particularly waiting for that. And what came as an icing on the cake was like there were these 10, 12 women who suddenly walked in. The youngest would probably be 70. And they came in with uniform blue silk saris. They sat in a semicircle and they started singing old bhajans, Marathi bhajans. And I said, this is like a gold mine, so I recorded them. And eventually I used them in the film. So there was a scene in the film where Kashibai is showing her new bedroom to Bajirao. Yeah. She's wanting to win him back from Mastani. Yeah. And when she's showing Bajirao this thing, so there are this bhajan which is playing in the thing. So Sanjay sat up and says, where did that come from? I said that I had recorded that. So he says, this is one of my best designed films, madam. So this is like I can see the design. He was so happy with the whole process because I was parallelly creating another story.
Correct. That sound piece has no realistic relevance.
No realistic relevance. And also it is adding to the thing. I mean, you did not want to record stuff where people would stop listening to the, focusing on the story and understanding what is that sound. That is not what you want. You want, it has to add to the story. It has to add to the mahal. So when those kind of things start happening, then they realize that,
It's coloring.
yeah, this gives it that flavor or the coloring, whatever you call it. So these are some of the examples that as a sound designer,
Correct.
I would think and I would love to do. So between dialogues and music, there are a lot of patches where you would subtly create certain...
There's space for all that.
Space for all that. Then one example was where Bajirao is going for war. He's leaving for war. Now it's raining very heavily and there's a close-up of his feet walking away from the camera. There are soldiers standing almost like a guard of honor on both the sides. And there's heavy thunder and rain happening and he's walking in between. Now there was a huge orchestra in the whole process. I started eliminating instruments from that. And then I kept only the drum. It was a piece which was very well designed. So I could remove a lot of things and just kept only the low cello instruments and the low musical instruments. And I kept one element of the drum which almost sounded like a snare drum. Gave it a lot of reverb. And the big drums were replaced by thunder. So, and there was this low note which was, it was a very grave moment where he's going for war. It was a very intense moment. So when Sanjay came to the mix, I warned him. I told him, look, I've messed around with your music and I've shut off things. And because with the design and all that, I created a particular thing. Ab tu mere ko bol ki whether you like it or not. So he said, okay, let me. I said, don't worry, I have not lost anything. Yeah. You can still have your entire music and I will subdue all the effects and all that. Yeah. So then I played the sequence for him, what I had done. He heard it once, twice, and then he said, okay, now play it with the whole music. So I played the whole thing with all the music that was there. And then he tells me, no, what you did was much better. And therefore I say, it's very important for a director to know and understand music. Yeah. So then he started telling me, he knew why I did what I did. So he said, you've used the rain as the pad track. You're using the thunder as the percussion. And when he started speaking like that, then I said, boss, I've hit the jackpot. I was like, these are moments that you feel elated that they have understood that, and it was having a better impact, the scene, and more dramatic impact than it would have been with just a wash of music.
Too many things. But this is like a director, music director, and sound designer is the trio actually who create these things. Yes. But how much of who decides what? In fact, like how do you go about it?
So that's a very tricky question, and for me, it puts me in a very precarious kind of a position because you don't want to offend the music director, and at the same time you're trying to convince the director that let's not have too much of music over there because this particular scene there's a whole design. And what does happen is when they're editing the film, they don't hear the design.
Correct.
So the tendency of filling up those empty spaces with temp music is very it's very tempting.
Yeah, very tempting
to fill up those places with music.
Yeah.
So when the design comes in place, then they realize this is having a better impact.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is you try and tell the music, you sit with the music director and almost you're trying to, kind of woo the music director into telling him, boss, please don't keep very heavy percussions in the war scenes because, if you do too much of drums and tan kind of a thing, it'll clash with, say, the horses neighing or, if there are gunfights and bullets and stuff like that, it'll clash with the effects which are already very loud and percussive in nature. So don't add to the confusion by adding more effects. Keep your music more legato. You can, or muted drums and, thick, low elements which will cement the effects. The music will bring out the emotions also because only effects can be very tiring. Say a sword fight or a gun fight can be very tiring. So the music has to come in at one point. But together, it has to be a good marriage between non-percussive music in very busy areas to and where there are parts which is mostly music, that time you kind of bring down the effects and let the music kind of take over.
But does it become a fight between the music director and you?
No, that you see, one advantage that I have today is my seniority. So, but at the same time, I'm very respectful of whoever is doing the music. Like if it's a very new music director, then it becomes easier to communicate. And what I do is I tend to send them the sound design. This is going to be the design, so work your music around it. or they themselves, some of the music directors themselves ask me, like, why can you send us the this thing? Like for Chava, Rahman wanted the sound design. So I send the sound design to them. And
It's a different thinking actually.
It's
for
a different
people,
thing,
to incorporate things, and they know that they are part of filmmaking.
Yeah.
It's not they don't own certain space.
Yeah. So, but there are a lot, especially I've seen in the South, mostly I've seen that, the hero ki entry and his actions are entirely punctuated by
Correct. Music and
heavy music all the time. And so then, the sound design or the drama or the dynamics become subdued with,
Something
it becomes like a huge Kathakali.
Yeah.
Where it becomes a music video.
Yeah.
So, because they have no design in place.
Yeah.
And what happens is the producer or the director who's also watching it, or even the actor who's watching it, usko lag raha hai ki, all these dynamics are coming from the music. So they're getting like full on drums and dan 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 kind of a thing to create more drama out of that whole thing. They don't realize that there's also a design process which is there, which is why you will not find too much of, you'll find a lot of more music in those kind of films.
Yeah.
And loud dialogue and stuff like that. But
Sometimes-
sound design is very minimalist.
Correct. Sometimes you find music become noise and noise become music.
Yes.
It's a,
So that, and the loudness. So what happens is like, the loudness, they don't realize that, people in the theaters, they reduce.
yeah.
The levels.
I know this thing.
And when they reduce the levels, then all the subtleties in the sound or the dialogues
Gone.
get badly affected. Because the loudest, even the tendency of people, of many such producers or the directors, they are like, when the song comes in, just let it play at the loudest level. I call it baffling with bullshit, when you can't dazzle with brilliance.
Yeah.
So you're trying to fill in the weaker points in the film with music just to kind of,
It's a very senseless kind of an approach.
So unfortunately, I'm working in an industry where I have to sometimes deal with these kind of people. And luckily, for me, I've come to a point where I know that I probably don't want to work in those kind of situations.
It keeps happening. Like a film of mine was getting released, big film, and I went for the first show in a theater which is nearby. So it is not one of those main theaters, big theater in a multiplex. So I can't hear anything.
Yeah.
The sound is half, level it's playing. So interval I came out and I found the guys and I was like, why it is playing so low? So he said, no, we are at the correct mark and all that. But then after interval, it came back to normal. So then I asked them, what was the film before this? What were you playing, till Thursday? Then I realized why it has gone like that.
Yeah.
The setting is for that.
Correct.
They have mixed it very high.
Yeah.
And normally theaters pull it down to save their speakers and all that, and finally it comes into that. So this is a very common issue which I have spoken to a lot of people.
Yes. And it is a very hugely disturbing thing. So even I also, what happens is I don't prefer to mix my film in such a loud level. I prefer to mix it at a soft level, because what happens is I know they're going to pull it down. So when they pull it down, I should not lose my data.
Yeah.
The brilliance should not go away.
Yeah.
So I compensate for those kind of things as well. But there's only a point where you can do it till. But what happens is, it also depends on how well it is designed and how I'm able to do a good design if it is a good edit and a good sequence.
Correct.
Then, it's a good process.
Yeah.
Then it's a good process. Then what happens is like, as the dialogues have got their share, the effects have got their share, the music has got their share. So it's a very well balanced kind of a
Peacefully listen.
Yeah.
To that.
There are also very dialogue heavy kind of films
Yeah.
where the sound should just be supporting. It should be. It should not. It cannot overpower.
Yeah,
because information is mainly in the dialogue.
That's a design call.
That's a design call.
Yeah.
But to enable that, you have to design it in such a way so that in the mix you don't have to take such drastic steps of crushing the music or.
But I'm saying the lack of standardization, which is there actually, but nobody keeps it.
That's another story.
I was
It is not there.
I was in a jury of a state film award. Every film comes different, So some of them you increase because it's just the jury who is watching the film. So we have an access to the projection and all that. So you keep changing it. So that time I gave a suggestion to the government that, like a census certificate, you put another card in the beginning of the film. What level the film has been mixed, where the final mix is at what level. So I know where to keep it.
Yeah.
But none of that happens actually, so nobody follows.
See, that's a very complex thing, and apparently it does not. I was under the impression that there is some kind of a standardization in the West, which unfortunately is not there also. It's not there also. So how do you standardize? That is the thing. When Dolby was there, there was a certain level of standardization. There was a uniformity in most of the studios because they had the Dolby curve and stuff like that. So people adhered to those parameters. But when the digital came in and suddenly Dolby went out of the window, then I could mix my film in the bathroom and give it out. Or you can mix it in a studio.
But you still have something like 7.1, you have to mix it and all that.
No, the loudness
could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere. So it is the content in the film and also your setting. So if there was an element that this is how much you cannot go beyond that. So if there is a government body or if there is somebody who
an understanding even,
an understanding also, because I've heard vague stories like like live sound, the people who do live sound. So the cops were told that it should not 65 dB se upar nahi jana chahiye.
Okay.
So the guy who was doing the live sound was like, boss, I've brought down my level so much, like 65 dB is nothing for the kind of show. So you cannot put this on me.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, now turn that. They have been given SPL meters, so they can see the numbers over there.
This is the show.
This is for a live event, like a live musical
concert
show.
or something.
Concert. So the cops have been given that to say that, okay, let the show should not be this thing. Then this guy turned around and said, now face the instrument to the traffic and see. The traffic was about 75, 80 decibels. So he's tapping the meter and wondering something is wrong with the meter. So he said, no, that is not how it works. The sound of the traffic is louder than 70 decibels. So what are you measuring basically and how are you measuring? So this is the level of ignorance that prevails.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you're talking about standardization and all, boss, we need to be far more evolved in our understanding. Society, overall in general. So that's a huge problem that we are all dealing with.
Yeah. When does music come in? After sound design or before sound design? Or is it parallel?
It has to be parallel because everything has to be parallel. Because there is no time for, when the post-production happens, all the departments are simultaneously working. So there is background score happening over there. There is film dubbing happening over there. There is Foley also happening over there. There is my design also which is happening. What I generally do is I start designing, like laying the sound effects and doing my sound edit job. I start doing it right from the rough cut stage.
Okay.
And for a Bansali film, I used to tell them that whenever you edit one sequence, forget a reel. You do one sequence and you send me the sequence. So at least I can start sourcing the sounds. What are the kind of sounds I want to put?
So you go to the edit.
I go to the edit, or the edit comes to me.
You go to location also?
I go to, my team goes. I don't go on location to record, but I do go on location to see. Like there is a film that is going on for which they needed to record the dhol, and there is speech also. There is dialogue also. So they called me over there because I needed to keep make sure that the guy who's singing and playing the dhol, and there is a dialogue also happening. So singing and playing the dhol, I made sure that he played at a particular key. So I kind of would give him the key and he would sing to that. Suppose C is the scale that he's going to play in for one particular song, and the other song is suppose playing in D. So I made sure that they stuck to this thing. I would give them from my iPhone. I would give them over the PA. I would give them the note and they would play. Because in the post production, I know it will help when you're doing the background score. Then there's a key reference. So the score can also be there, or if they need to embellish it with other instruments, then that also they can do with a standardized key. So I therefore went to the location, freezing in Punjab in the night when they were recording a sequence. So that is a very interesting thing. So these are things that I go for if it is there particularly in one particular location. It also depends on the production, because I would like to be on location for many places, but they usually don't take you or don't think of taking you unless you insist that I want to be there for this particular thing. I wanted to be in Banaras for Parinita because the entire place is buzzing with sounds. So you are having Azan at one side, you are having Aarti on the other side early in the morning. So sound designed by God. So I wanted to capture that. So those kind of things I'm using in the film. And then there are these old buildings where you're having pigeons flying and running. Very interesting sounds. Then somebody started singing bhajan and then people follow him, and then suddenly there's a group who's started at some point and they come to the river bank and they culminate the bhajan over there and then they disperse. This is a ritual that they do, for example. Like we caught hold of one troupe like that. One random guys. They came and joined this, and then they dispersed into their daily lives. So these are very interesting sounds that are there on location, which a guy who's recording for the film will not have time to stray away from the main shoot and record these sounds.
Do you have a guy who's always do your location recording?
I have several people because it's not possible to have one person working. So
different projects.
There are different projects and different this thing. Like it depends. I kind of try and understand what is this thing. Then I ask that particular person if they're free to do that particular work.
And you give specific instructions to these people.
Like Sriram Raghavan, for example, he's making a film with an army backdrop. It's a 1965 story of a real story of a tank commander. And so I chose this guy. He was our junior from FTI called Gunjan. So I told Gunjan because I narrowed in on Gunjan because his sensibilities are very good. He has a good musical mind also, and he's a good sound engineer. And his father was in the army. So he comes from an army background. So he knows the protocol. He knows the discipline of the army. He knows this thing. So I thought that this particular guy would be great in this because, there are a lot of things that he could, that he would be familiar with in a defense sort of an environment. So that kind of a thing. Or somebody like another film, there's this guy and I would know that, and I know the director is comfortable with this guy. So I'll send this guy. I'll say that, Manas, why don't you go and do this? So it depends. So it depends on who's free and how.
Is it, in camera, in picture, we have second units running, parallelly many times, because it's easier to have another person taking, which is not very important not the main cast scenes, Do you have things like that in sound, like having a second unit sound unit?
For a second unit camera, of course, you have a second unit sound. And
not
that
necessarily for a second unit sound camera, second unit camera unit. I'm saying a second unit parallelly, like we use a second unit camera.
Yeah.
Does the sound use a second unit sound recordist,
Yes, you have to. So that I leave to the guy who is doing the sound because he chooses, his counterpart to do the second unit over there. I don't really get into that, but the instructions are very clear. What are the kind of sounds that you're looking at?
Correct.
Now coming back to the post-production format, when you're in the post-production, so after the edit is done, I from the sequences I start, and then when the reels come, by the time the reels come, I have already compiled sequentially all the sounds, and the others is to line them up together and work starts on that. Before that, we have to do the dialogue cleaning process. I like to retain the actual sync sound. Because that's the best sound, best performance of an actor comes in the sound. Because he's reacting to the environment. Now, I'm speaking to you in a very quiet way. We are sitting across the table and we are talking. Now, suppose we were standing out on the road.
Correct.
We would be screaming at each other. Yeah. So this automatically happens in this thing. It's very difficult to recreate this sort of a dynamics in the dubbing studio. Unless the actor understands. Like there was a film called Runway 34 where Ajay Devgan had asked me to come and do the sound. He said if you don't do the sound, I'll go to Russia to do the post-production. I felt very, very, I said, oh wow, thank you so much and all that. So he's a brilliant actor. Now there is one scene in that Runway 34 where he meets an old friend in a discotheque, in a pub in Dubai. So, and the film was a film that was to be dubbed. Because it was not a sing-sound film. And so I was worried about this because pub mein kya hota hai, you already have this DJ music coming in, which is a huge, thick bass music coming in. So again, that logic comes in where I don't talk to you, I scream at you. Hi Mulli, how are you and where were you? And my tone automatically changes.
You don't listen half the stuff.
You don't listen to half the we are screaming at each other. So when he came for the dub, he started dubbing like that. Because what happens is, suppose this is the level that we are talking. In the pub, if we talk like that, it will sound very unnatural. Then what will happen is, I will not be able to drive the pub music and I have to drop the music because dialogue is important. We all are looking to get a clear dialogue. But the energy of that entire scene is going to drop. Because that thick dub, that, the distorted bass of the pub, boom, 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 that should come across. So he anticipated that. And he was screaming at that guy. He says, hey, tu kidhar tha? And those kind of things. So I was so happy that, and he's such a seasoned actor.
Yeah.
You then realized
Yeah.
that he has taken that into account.
Yeah.
That I didn't have a problem in the mix, so I
Doing
could keep
that.
his dialogue also at that level, and I could keep the music also at a high level.
Is there a space for innovation in it, like equipments, anything to be made or, things like that? Does it happen, or is there any space for that or requirement for that? Recording realistic sounds or even otherwise?
Realistic sounds actually depends entirely on the location. Well, there's no need, like in a
So
camera.
these days you get very small mics and all that, like whether
Yeah,
they get
yeah, yeah.
incorporated
Those are there.
and, like apart from the professional equipment, do you
Yeah.
use amateur stuff and stuff?
No. This is everything is in the professional field. Even the mics are the color of the skin, and they're put in this thing. So very complex microphones have come up, and you can hide microphones wherever you don't need this thing, and you have like several tracks that you're recording on. So we are living, like I was saying, we are living in very good times.
Okay.
So I have the flexibility of treating and processing each and every dialogue track. And that's another process which also happens. So while I'm laying my dialogue FX tracks, the dialogue guys, my dialogue team, I have teams. So I have this dialogue team working and cleaning the dialogues. I have the person, there's one person who's sitting and doing the action scenes. There's one person who's sitting and doing the background sounds, like the atmospheric sounds and stuff like that. Then there is one person who's matching the dubs. Looking at the dubs of the characters, because I can't be in every place at the same time. So I have my team, and we are connected to each other. Then the Foley team. But I go and visit, and for me, Foley is also very important. Like in Bajirao, I had 7 layers of footsteps for one king. I needed the squeak of the leather, I needed the heaviness of the footfall, I needed the thickness of the. I needed his body weight, because what happens is he's a king. His footfall should have that authority. How do you give that authority? You give it with density and sound. So when his footfall is there, and when the creak of the leather comes in, then it just changes the dynamics. It changes the tone, the attitude of that particular guy.
It's a mix of 7 tracks which create
So
that.
it's a mix of seven or 8 tracks, this thing. Because when the Foley guys did it for me, I sent it back to them. I said, boss, what is this? This is not how it is done. So I had to redo it many times. I have done that.
So they used different shoes and different stuff.
Different boots, different shoes. They use different leather pieces to create the creak of the sound. Then when women are walking, the fineness of the pile, the jewelry, the tinkling, that brings out the feminine quality of this queen who's probably walking, or this lady who's probably walking in this period drama.
So each small piece of sound is actually not just one piece. It's a mixture
It's a combination. Even one gunshot. If you hear a regular 9mm on the road, it'll sound like a firecracker. Tuck, tuck, tuck. It is the most unglamorous sound. But when you're having a close-up of the gun, on a huge 70mm screen, when you're having a close-up of the gun, that needs to be layered with several other sounds. So I have layered it with explosions, with tank guns, with bombs and everything, with low, including a pistol sound. So it's a collection of all these sounds designed in such a way that it gives you a dum kind of an effect, which needs to be dramatic. It's like makeup.
which rattles the screen and the audience.
It needs to create that impact. So what happens? Why do you need to have makeup? You need to process the sound.
Yeah.
Like when you guys add makeup to a person, it is not to, you need to highlight his cheekbones or her cheekbones. So you are going to make sure that the makeup guy shades it in such a way, and you will light it in such a way. They will shade the 2 sides of the nose to make the nose more streamlined. And you will light it up in such a way that these things come out.
Yeah. Or hide.
Or hide. So this is what gives the, the persona of the character. Why are, actors so dependent on camera people? So they are very particular about the way it is. They look. So sound also, you are qualifying that particular guy with the starting from treating his voice to the sounds that are put over there.
Correct.
So there are a lot of other sounds which are also adding to make it sound thick and big.
So, is there a story where you have done so much of work in terms of mixing so many elements to create a particular emotion or a mood, and at the last stage you realize that, that whole scene is based on a piece of music?
Happens most of the time. Especially in Chhawa, it has happened a lot because there was so much of detailing in the war sequences, but then they took a call that, we would want it more music driven. So of course my heart sank. And it is what it is. So that is a creative call. So it does happen. But then there are times when you're working, like when I was working on a film like Uri, for example. That was my most, and Madras Cafe before that. Those were my most satisfying films in terms of how my sound has turned out and how I wanted it to turn out. Like in Madras Cafe, it was again a film with a backdrop of war. And another interesting part of Madras Cafe was that was the first Indian film mixed in complete native Dolby Atmos. So, मैंने वो पंगा ले लिया. I said, I had very little time for my, like, sound always gets very little time for post-production. So I decided that I'm going to mix this film in Dolby Atmos because that was the latest thing, latest technological advancement that came, and I wanted this film because this film needed it. I needed to have the choppers flying over the head. So I told the director it's not going to cost you anything extra from a regular thing. It's just that let's do it in Dolby Atmos. So he was like, yeah, whatever you say. And then when we did it in Dolby Atmos, we worked overtime. My studio was not equipped. So just to get an idea, I kind of hung 2 speakers from the ceiling. I made a bar and I temporarily hung 2 speakers on the ceiling just to get an idea of how it would sound if the chopper flew on top of your head. Today, of course, I've made my little studio into an Atmos studio. Okay. So I have properly
multiple speakers.
Multiple speakers, and I have made it in that way. But that was the beauty of it. So that when you're talking about innovation, how we did it, this is again, this is the way I thought that I will innovate this, and I brought 2 pair of speakers and I put it on top, and then said, "Wow, this is now sounding great." So then I called the director and I played it to him, and he was like, "Oh wow." So I said, roughly this is going to be it, and it's going to sound 100 times better in a proper mixed theatre.
When you're talking about Madras Cafe and Uri, both are action, army-based films, but one is around 50 years behind, right? Madras Cafe is a very period film, and this is a very contemporary film. So how do you approach these 2 films in terms of sound?
Yes. So the kind of guns that they used back in the day, the kind of vehicles that they used back in the day. So I was very particular about those, the kind of rifles or the kind of guns that you would use. And in Uri also, the sophistication of equipment of the commandos today. What I learned are special forces, they can choose the kind of guns that they want. It is not necessarily from your armory. If they decide that they want to use that, they want to buy that particular gun, they can.
Okay.
They want to use this thing, they can. So they do have their own set of equipment. And they are very sophisticated and they sound very So I had mixed a lot of sounds, science fiction kind of weaponry kind of sounds. Uzis, then combination of Uzis and Stens, and I made the terrorists shoot with AK-47s, which they were. So AK-47s, and they were distinctly different sounds. And then the shells of the bullets falling. So when the guy is shooting, then what makes it more dramatic is not just the shot.
So it's not realistic sound you're talking about.
It's not realistic
impact
sound. It's the impact that you're creating. You see, what happens is when the bullet hits the glass, the shattering is far more dramatic than the bullet whizzing by. So I have the bullet travel is there. But when it hits the wall, the crumbling of the wall or the dust flying, that texture is something that I look at. The grains that you guys also say, these are grains for us. So when I'm shooting and when there are tinkling of all these bullet shells falling all around, the audience was spellbound. They were they felt, from non-film audience, I've got feedback saying that, we could hear the bullet shells falling. That was a revelation. So I try to bring in these in the mainstream, where a regular film would have just ended with some random gunshots. That would not make it interesting.
Lifting the whole ambience.
Lifting the whole ambience is something which is really important.
Very perceptible.
Yeah, and I would go into all the choppers were created by VFX. So I would go to the VFX studio and see the chopper, what kind of a chopper it is.
Right.
What is the magnification of the chopper? How far is it? Is it banking? What is the movement of the chopper? So I know the VFX is going to take time to render and come to me, but I've already, because I've gone and seen that, I've already come and accumulated, compiled my sound, chopper sound library.
So during the shoot, actually, you keep piling up your effects and sound.
No, this was in the post-production, because during the shoot also they have no idea. They have shot it with effects like coming down from the chopper and all they have done, and with a blue screen and stuff like that. But the detailing happens in the VFX stage. But you know the script, you have read the script and how it is going to be, so you have a fair idea of how you're going to execute that. I even Aditya reminded me that because I was in Kerala actually at that time for this IFI KIF thing where Rasul and I, Rasul called me there and said, let's go and have a master class. So that was the time when Aditya sent me the script and I was like, I read the script and then Aditya called and said, what do you think? And my reply to him was, I could hear the film. So he was very excited, I was very excited. And we ended up working on the film and it was really a very satisfying experience. So going back to Madras Cafe and the time, yes, there was a certain periodic element to it, but it was very subtle because eventually it was not so much about the technology or this thing, but it is just about the kind of equipment that they use, the kind of rifles that they use, the kind of ammunitions that they use.
No, I'm saying apart from the reality of what equipment they used, was there a difference in the mix or in the design of the sound for a period film and a contemporary film?
Yes, because actually, it's a very funny thing that you and I, when we are watching a film and when somebody says, the younger generation says this is a period film, for me, it becomes hard to
came from that period.
Because I come from that period. I remember Raju Hirani was staying in a paying guest accommodation and we were all very young at that time, just came to Bombay and I was at Raju's house. And we were sitting, having a drink and whatever, and suddenly somebody called on his phone, landline, there used to be only landline, there were no mobiles, and said Rajiv Gandhi has been shot. Yeah. So suddenly there was everything just stopped. And we ceased doing whatever and we went back because we were apprehending some kind of violence or some kind of disturbance and an effect to this. So then we went back to our house and the next day I remember Bombay was like the lockdown, it was completely still. There was no violence, there was no activity, there was just grief.
I was in Delhi that time.
So you must have felt it more over there.
Exactly. We were about to start a film, Ketan Mehta's film. I was there as an assistant. And we landed the previous day, went off to sleep. And I told there is no phone and all, no? So I told the reception that wake me up at 5:30. And went off to sleep. And then I wake up at around 7 o'clock. And I realized, shit, 7 o'clock and I'm supposed to be on location at 7 o'clock. So I just got up and got ready and all that. I landed at the reception and I said why didn't you wake me up? So he said, there is no shoot. I said, who are you to tell me there is no shoot, And he said, no, everything is standstill. And the city just froze.
So unlike Mrs. Gandhi's, the aftermath of Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, this was more like a shock and grief for the people.
But even Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, the parents started later. Not immediately people freeze.
No, immediately people froze, but we were in FTI.
Yeah, we were in FTI.
And Charles Pongo, I remember the student from Ghana, he came rushing down and declared that Mrs. Gandhi has been shot. He was listening to the BBC.
There was an evening bulletin which came out, I remember reading.
Later they said she was this thing. Anyway, so we have lived that period. We have lived that whole Rajiv Gandhi period and this thing. And that was another worry, by the way, of the director. Will the new generation understand or tune in with this? But surprisingly they did, because it was not it was more an emotional story. It was a story of this guy based on that whole thing, of how he could prevent the assassination if they had only listened. So that is what was eating him and that is his frustration. So there were stages in that film, like for example when the belt bomber, the belt bomb lady basically, when she was equipping herself with the thing, I cut out all the sounds and I just kept the sounds of her ornament. Very subtle. People will not this thing because it was the music also. Shantanu had done the music and I had given Shantanu the full design. So his music was also very nice in that. So there was a stillness in the whole thing. That there's a whole rehearsal that they are doing before they are going to this thing. So when she's wearing that whole thing and how they rehearse the process, I shut out everything and I just kept the ornaments, the bangle, the necklace, this thing, and a very feminine kind of a sound in complete contrast of what was going to happen. The violence that would happen after that would be in complete contrast to this whole very dainty kind of sound.
Masculine violence.
Very masculine violence, bolo jo bhi bolo, but this whole
Violence is always
violence is masculine. So that was one thing. You also, in order to create a shock element, you don't necessarily have to blast everything all the time. To make it more effective, the previous scene ko thoda sa soft kar do. Make everything very quiet.
Then you have a contrast.
That you have a contrast. So even if it is not a bomb blast, even if it is a water drop, people will get startled.
Correct.
Just you creating a particular silence, relative silence, and then the blast becomes far more effective.
What was probably if you look at the most challenging scene or a most challenging movie you worked on?
Every movie is very challenging. Every movie is very challenging.
Or a scene which you have put the maximum number of tracks, or something which is much heavier than you had ever expected.
There are
no story like that.
No major surprises like that. There are no major stories like. But there have been. I have like there was one scene in Padmavat, for example, where where he rapes the servant girl on the day of his wedding, when he just catches hold of this ruthless Alauddin Khilji was supposed to be a character like that, where he just grabs hold of this girl and he rapes her. So that entire rape scene was very mundane, it was just very this thing. So I kind of dramatized that entire scene with, like her hand hitting the thing and the metal hitting his violence of his clothes and his activity. I kind of made that slightly larger than life, the whole thing. So suddenly the scene suddenly became live. And I remember Justin, who was mixing, he says, "Ye aapke dimag mein kaise aata hai ye sab?" And I said, "I don't know, I just react to the story." This is one very small incident. So several these kind of stuff, things do happen, and for me right now,
you can't pick up.
I'm not able to pinpoint a certain thing.
But I think those are the moments you finally gets you the happiness, of work.
Yeah.
When finally you go through all that,
Yeah.
and you sit back and listen to it and see the film, and you realize, shit, I have done all that. Which is.
I'll tell you one thing. There was one film called Chintu Ka Birthday. Okay, it was shot indoors. It was about this. It was shot. The director was Satyanshu Singh. Satyanshu and Devanshu, two brothers. Devanshu. So I found that film very interesting because again they told me the story before that it is about a salesman who somehow has reached Iraq. Done some juljal, and he's reached Iraq and he's working over there as a water purifier salesman. And he's been doing fairly good, selling this thing to people over there. So he brought his family along, his older daughter, his small son Chintu, and even his mother-in-law. सबको लेके वो इराक में बहुत अच्छी तरह से जी रहा है. Till the first Iraq invasion happens. So it was set in that time. So the story is a very tongue-in-cheek kind of humor भी है उसमें, and there's a little bit of tentativeness in the whole thing. So the backstory is like this guy could not be extracted because he's gone with some Nepali passport or something. Now the Indian embassy can't bring him back because he's not an Indian.
Okay.
So now the thing is, the story is that he wants to celebrate his son's birthday. So the son has this dream of calling his schoolmates over, classmates over, and his cake would come from the bakery. But all that was not to happen because The school has been bombed, so none of his friends are coming. The bakery has been bombed, so no cake is happening. So now the thing is, okay, let's make a cake for him. So that is the agenda of the film, and that's how it starts. And suddenly, one car bomb goes off in the neighborhood, and suddenly shit hits the roof, and there's total chaos, and that kind of a thing. I had to create the soundscape of Iraq. I've never been to Iraq, let alone a battle-ridden one. So I had to create those
Which you
kind
don't
of
see,
things,
actually.
which you don't see. But at the same time, you cannot constantly have machine gun fire,
Correct.
bombs happening over there. That would seem very this thing. So there are very quiet moments. There are places where there's a slight, a muted sound of a chopper going just to give the reality that this is the thing. There's somewhere there's an ambulance going. So you had to, and another thing which was very the Humvee, there were these Humvees, they used to have megaphones and speakers on the Humvees where they would shout in Arabic asking people to be indoors. So this was the American guys, they would announce and ask the civilians to clear out basically, to minimize civilian casualties. So there was this constant message that would go and ask people to vacate certain areas where they are going to invade and, some encounter is going to happen and stuff like that. Or, those kind of messages. Now, when we came to Bombay, that was, I think 91, 92, I think was the first Iraq invasion. And that was the time when satellite television also took over. Started taking off in India. So we used to get CNN. So CNN was reporting right from the
Warfield.
ground zero. So that for us became like what video games are for kids today.
Yeah.
So for us that became like video games. Suddenly you moved out from that monotonous state-run television to satellite television with so many options, and here there's very smart reporting of right from ground zero what they're doing and all that. Somewhere in my subconscious, I realized that I picked up this thing from these CNN coverages where these people would go and announce and ask them to clear. So much later when I'm working on this, and I realized that created a lot of drama and tension. So I asked my dubbing coordinator that I told her ki, you need to get me an Arabic voice. I need this thing. And luckily she found an Iraqi student from Pune. So he came down, and he was of course very young when the first Iraq invasion happened at that time. So I asked him, do you remember what he says, yeah, I remember. And do you remember how it was said? So he says, yeah. So I said, can you parrot it? Can you just repeat how the messages would be relayed? So he went on to this ramble, and he went on and said, and whatever they would announce on that. Then I treated it like it was sounding from a megaphone, being reflected from all the buildings, and I played it to him. He said, did it sound like that? He was like, yes, this is how it sounded like. So I got my first certification that, okay, I'm on the right track. And I wanted to use this, and I've used that in that film as a tension element in the entire thing. So I surprised myself. So when you're saying that what is the thing, so this suddenly came into my mind that, yeah, I actually surprised myself. I didn't realize that I had it in my subconscious, but it came out. It came out, and it kind of created a whole dramatic sequence.
Yes. When you come to Foley, this is what you were saying in the beginning.
Yeah.
I think it's an amazing art of creativity. It's not. I'm not talking about repeating footsteps probably, but creating a lot of other effects which the sound you don't realistically realize like what it is. So that's a team which works, right?
Yeah.
So there are great minds in that probably
Yes.
who come up with things which are.
There are Foley artists who are working in this industry. I've been working with them for the last over 3 decades. Our good old Karnal Singh and Chaudhary and Gupta. And there are also some other kids like Rahul and Rafiq and Shankar. So there are these groups of Foley artists who I have worked with, and I'm very impressed with them. But at the same time, I get very involved in the whole Foley process, and they also respect that, because I tell them that it is, most of my films, the Foley is like upfront. For me, it gives the texture. Sound mein texture wahan se aata hai, the crunch. When the foot hits the dirt, I need to hear the crunch of the soil. That gives the tension. That gives the cracking twigs. that gives another kind of a drama. Now, in Runway 34, for example, it's based on an incident in Kerala where the pilot had overshot the runway and he did not go as per the protocols. So it is a story about that pilot who, in his best capacity, did whatever he did to save the day. So when the aircraft is shuddering, I needed that sound because it is not just a metal shuddering. There's a lot of, I call it plastic. It's actually PVC kind of material that is lined in the aircraft. The aircraft is aluminum, and to make it lightweight, you need to have these PVC kind of materials which are there. Now, where do I get that? How can I get that aircraft shudder? I cannot go to the aircraft, tell the pilot, please fly the plane. Or I can't go to the soldier and say, please shoot your AK-47. He'll shoot me down. So we have to recreate these sounds in Foley. So then I asked the production guy to get me a broken washing machine, a broken refrigerator, a broken microwave. And then I rattled all these sounds. So there was this huge plastic sound in the refrigerator because it is lined with plastic and this thing. So there's minimalistic metal over there. Then the washing machine, of course, rattle of the plastic. Again, the drum inside is this thing. And then the microwave, those kind of things that, So layering these three and changing the pitch, changing the equalization, processing, you suddenly made it sound like an aircraft. Shuttering.
Amazing.
So these are things that you realize and you enjoy doing it. It's like, sometimes I wonder, am I really getting paid for this? I'm having fun. But you realize that, once they put it and then when you play...
There's no other way.
There's no other way. There's no other way. I mean, how do you do it? So
no modern AI electronics.
No, nothing. And of course, your library sounds are also there to enhance this thing. So it's a stack again of a lot of sounds to create one particular effect. So you're constantly doing this.
So you have your own library.
I have at least 96 terabytes of sound.
Oh, shit.
I have 2 RAID drives full of sound effects. So I have bought a lot. I've acquired a lot. There are a lot of sounds which I've recorded and collected over the years.
Which you have a team which keep going and
which
recording.
goes and we kind of record and we bring it back and those kind of, which I have also gone at certain places and recorded. So, there were very interesting places like one Telugu film I was working on where I went to old Hyderabad and this happened to be during Ramzan. So that whole old Hyderabad, the typical azans you can't just add any azan over there. Yeah. It is a very typical old Hyderabad azan. Yeah. And early mornings of, suddenly a series of azans would ring out. Then in that particular locality. And that house, they've got goats also. So goats be bol rahe hain isme. So, and the hustle bustle of the market and the town over there and the people shouting and the bikes and the chaos of the market. So these kind of things I like to go and record. Kaise tha Charminar ke time to wahan pe record kiya, so how it was sounding. Those kind of things.
Whom do you argue the most with, except your wife?
Arguing... I think I argue a lot with Rajkumar Hirani.
I'm not talking personally. I'm talking about in the various people you just mentioned. When Foley, location, there's that. Music producer, composer. So many people of different strata of profession. They don't come from the same kind of mindset or same kind of egoistic or all that.
Yeah. Actually, it is not in my nature to fight or argue with anybody, because what happens is eventually you are working for the film.
Correct.
Now I'm trying to win over my Foley team and make them see the film or hear the film through my ears.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell them that this is what I'm going to do, because many a times what happens is they do a particular sound and leave it over there. And I am thinking 10 steps ahead. This is the sound, these are the elements that are going to come over there, and this particular sound needs to be, reinforced, or it needs to be qualified with more layers. So that is something which they are not seeing. So I need to tell them that, you have to do it in this way because this is how I'm going to do it. And sometimes I do it over there and show it to them on the workstation. Yeah. And I tell them that when I pitch it down and I play it and I add a little reverb to it and I kind of process the sound and give it to him and I say, this is what it's going to sound like.
Give them a feedback. So.
Then that gives them a kind of a boost. He says, and then they really try and work towards it. So it is mostly trying to win them over rather than arguing. So मेरा argument level बहुत कम होता है, except for certain one Raju, because he's our batchmate. I can't do that with everybody. I can do that to a certain this thing, and but that is also, he also realizes it is for the film that we are working. Absolutely. It is not anything to do with our egos. It is not anything to. And the last thing I would want to do is step on anyone's ego.
Correct.
And I want to make it a very conducive environment. We should have fun working.
Exactly. So
I don't like this very negative energy which comes. When people are doing this thing, we poke fun at each other. I make fun of the guy who is this thing. Arey, ye kya kar diya? This is going to do this thing. Arey, those kind of jokes we say. We tell him that, tu aise speed mein kaam karega, so I think you should give the call to the producer and say, please postpone the release date. So these are kind of things that we do. And then in the mix also, when I'm mixing with people like Justin or Debu, and I'm, that environment of the thing should be, because as it is, we carry a lot of stress. Yeah. The stress is because of the deadlines. Everybody is at everybody's throat with a dagger. So I don't want to doubly vitiate the atmosphere. Right. So we try and make it fun so that we are all exhausted. Correct. We are working 48 hours a day. Yeah. And we are trying to put things together so that we don't miss the deadline. At the same time, we don't compromise on the quality. So this battle is constantly on.
There is something which we were talking about, interdependability between different
faculties.
There's some story which comes to my mind. Like there was a film which I was doing. There, it's a kid who is disappearing into a jungle. So, and the mother and father are in search of this kid. So, at one point, the writer and the director told me that, there is a dialogue which says, it has become 6 o'clock, so the search stops there. So, I got in an argument. I said, no mother will stop, as long as there is daylight, she wants to go into that jungle further to find his kid, So, which for some reason they were not agreeing to it. So, the film shot over, that was one scene where this scene happens, this dialogue happens, and then the next scene is night. So what I had in my mind that time was how to solve this issue, because this is a problem for me. In the film, I see it as a problem. So later when it came to color correction, edit and all that, so what I did was I started taking the night a little early, very late evening. So the scene where this dialogue happens, I made it much darker. So that it looks like she can't see any further, So the dialogue kind of fits in there. Time is not the exact issue. It's getting darker also. So there's no way you can search any further kind of a thing. So this, I was talking to the sound designer at some point. So at some point I just mentioned, basically cribbing about the film and all that. So I said, this is what has happened, and I'm changing it in my coloring. He said, no, you can't do that. He said, why? He said, no, my day sound in the jungle and the night sound in the jungle are two different things. He said, I'm working a lot for the night thing because it has to be scary and all that. So now if you're shifting, it won't match. So I said, oh, I never thought about something like this. I said, you have to come to my studio and grading theatre and see it. So he came and I showed him the whole thing. I said, from where on I'm changing it. 3 scenes before that I start that so that it hits here and then go and all that. So these are the interdependability of the faculties which needs to be there.
Yes.
So even when you are talking about the Iraq issue, so I was saying maybe that sound design which you did should have gone earlier, to the thing, so their reaction would have been different, probably the kind of stuff which you put outside. Somewhere these mismatches happen a lot in our film because of a lack of planning, or because the different faculties do not sit together and talk about it. This what could be done in a film.
In fact, what happens in the sound is you're trying to fix the problems. Yeah. Where they're jumping the axis. Now from left to right you're panning, suddenly it has become right to left. And that is where you get caught. Where there is a jump in the edit. Now the character is walking in a mid shot, he's walking at a close up, he's walking at a place. And suddenly long shot, his pace has become either faster or slower. So these are things that we have to keep adjusting in this thing and create a particular.
Yeah.
Basically उसमें mayonnaise and
Yeah.
cheese spread लगा के उसको ठीक ठाक करना पड़ता है.
During the edit, the editor actually adds a lot of music, which are from some other film or things like that as reference music. Does it help you or is it a bother for you?
It is more a bother for the composer actually. Because what happens is this temp music seems to sound, that they have lived with it for so long that when a new music comes, then they don't want to.
They don't want to listen.
They say that no, that is still not sounding like the temp, which is a huge problem, not just here, even in Hollywood. So
Yeah.
temp music there are people who hate this temp music business. My thing is that, if there is going to be a temp music that you put it for your reference, but then take it out. It is because it's helping you edit, you have put it fine. But after that, lose the music completely. Now let it be a fresh thing and don't even play it to the
Composer for
composer or the
So
producer
I'm saying
or anybody else.
the issue is still there. I have a different lineup of that issue.
Yeah.
When a film is shot, that goes to the lab and they put a temporary grade onto that and send it to the edit. And the director and the editor sit on it for 3 months.
Yeah, and they react to that.
And when I recreate what I had conceived originally, when they come and see it, no, this is not what.
Yeah.
They say it's not the original. So I
Correct.
said, no, original I can show you,
Yeah.
which is nothing. So is it like it's our interpretation of the thing? That interpretation gets different.
There's a lot of disturbance
Lot
that
of
happens even in the rough mix when you give them a rough mix.
Yeah.
And then you realize that, and when you have done the mix properly and all, they say, no, we like what it was. So then you have to undo what you're doing and go back to what they have been living with.
Yeah.
So these are things that you're dealing with constantly. But there are very rare occasions where they say that, this is sounding differently better.
Correct.
But there are places where they have lived with this and then they say that no, it especially happens with music, temp music. And that is when, it gets very...
So I'm saying, why does it happen? Why can't, during the edit period or somewhere, once the sequence is kind of there, they can actually show it to the composer and say, this is the sequence, this is the content of it, this is the way it has been shot. Give me a temporary music from your side so that, I can, lay it and...
Many a times they don't even know who's going to do the music. And then the guys they choose for doing the music are probably not composers, but they have very good music producers, but then they're just, there's no compositional element to it. And film score anyways is treated like we say, background music. In Hollywood what happens is that score is what drives the film.
Correct.
There is no concept of a song. And if it's a song, it's very consciously okay or wrong. If it's a film on Elvis or if it's a film on this thing, then you have those kind of songs. If it's a film on Freddie Mercury, then it's it's song driven. Or it's a musical. But in a realistic kind of thing, what drives the thing is the music. Like a Mission Impossible, the score has become like an epic score which everybody relates to.
Yeah.
So those are things that we lack in terms of, we treat our background music. In very few films I know that, where the background music is like really nice.
Yeah.
Like I would say for the project that I worked in, I thought the background music of Madras Cafe was fantastic. The background music for Bajirao Mastani was really nice. So these are some of the films which stood out. Even background music for Uri was very nice. So these are films that were, the music drove and you feel that, that part of the,
Do we
part of the thing.
still have a scene where this music is published separately?
No.
Hollywood has that, right?
Hollywood has that. You can release the soundtrack. But over here, I'll tell you what happens. Concentration is, or the interest is more in the song. Film mein kitna gana hai. Like, they would release the songs, say a month in advance to create that marketing hype and buzz and whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So everybody has heard that, everybody has bought the cassette. So that time there was no score that was singing. So it never happens that, that you have the songs also and you have the score also. There are some wonderful scores in
We
Bajirao.
don't respect that, that's what I'm saying.
We don't respect that.
We don't market it.
Yeah. So, but the people have already lost interest because there is no concept of coming out. Very few films have come out with a release of the score of the film. Like Chokher Bali, for example. And it had a wonderful score and it would have been a collector's item had they this thing. So I fought tooth and nail for it. But by then people had moved on and they lost interest in the thing. And I was like, boss, this is such great items. And I did not have a studio at that time where I could keep all that material, and work on it later and keep it for my own records. I could not because I didn't have a studio. Then later, much later, after 3 decades, I got a call from the production saying, do you by chance have any? I said, now you're talking. You don't realize that, you are on a gold mine at that point.
But
So,
music industry is probably the most copyright conscious industry in the
Yes.
film industry, right?
Yes,
No?
yes.
But this is because why nobody kept that? This is not marketable material, so it's not copyrighted, or
Which? The
the
score?
Chokher Bali, you say
No, nobody thought about it.
it was there.
See,
But
basi-
today they do that, right?
See, what happens is, anyways, copyright would not affect that thing because the background score was Tagore's themes,
Okay.
Tagore's songs. The themes were based on Tagore's songs, and there was no copyright issue there.
No, not about
And
issue,
that-
I'm saying. If you, today actually every piece of music is being copyrighted.
Copyrighted.
And you follow that, like whether
Yes.
anybody using it or not.
But what had happened was the initiative should come from the production. जिसके लिए आप काम कर रहे हो. And suddenly, like, who are you to say all that? I could keep it, but I could, except for listening
not
to the
just
music
you, I'm
myself.
saying. Not just you, I'm saying even the composers.
Yeah,
I mean-
they were like, many of them want to this thing, but eventually what
They
happens
didn't have
is, today they've become a lot more conscious. A lot of composers have become conscious, and they get royalties and
Correct.
those kind of things. It's become much smarter nowadays, but we were very late in this whole process.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how many hours do you work in a day?
An average.
How many days you work in an hour?
An average is say about 14 to 16 hours a day. But now at this stage, I have people working with me, so
That's a different thing.
I have taken a little bit of a
Correct.
backseat.
But a release meaning 24 hours.
Oh, release means 48 hours a day.
Yeah, that's what I say.
So it's like you're working day, night, you're working round the clock, you're sleeping in the studio, everything is in the studio. That time, like you're totally cut off from your house, your family. You have made sure that nobody calls you or invites you or holds any kind of function around that time.
Yeah. I've written like, do you have a life outside your studio?
Now I do. There was a time when studio was a life. So because that was how it was. Because you work, you cannot like say it's 6 o'clock, I need to go home now.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of a creative process.
Correct.
So you can't take that call and say, you can't just abandon the thing. You have to
Responsibility.
finish that particular project. So we do a lot of, in our industry, not just for the sound guys, but for everybody working in the industry, the family takes a beating.
Yeah. So do you hear sound effects in your sleep?
No, I have, even when I go and see a film, I have learned over the years to detach myself from the technicality.
Okay.
So I watch it, I'll for a flick, I'll go and watch, like with popcorn and all that, I'll go and enjoy a film.
So a bad sound design in a film doesn't bother you much.
It initially does, and then when you see that they could have done so much more, but then you say, why am I getting into that? Let's just watch the film.
They have their own reasons.
Yeah, they have their own reasons or whatever. So you just watch the film and come out. So there are very few films where you say, oh wow, that's really smart.
Yeah.
So I'm a hard guy to please in that sense. So those are things that happen, but you have learned to detach yourself. I don't carry my work home. I sleep. I love my sleep.
So how much you think we are at par with Hollywood, technically and aesthetically?
Technically, we are almost there. And we are very capable of... what happens is, when you're talking about temp music and all, there have been instances where I have been given a DVD saying that, this is the kind of treatment that I'm looking at. That pissed me off completely. Of course, I didn't say it, but I told that person that I'm not going to watch the film. I've told both of them who had given me references, and I told them that I'm not going to watch this. I will watch it, but after the mix is done. So I know exactly what you want, and I know what you're looking at. I don't need to take a reference. So that became a challenge for me. I don't want to copy. Why should I copy the sounds? I want to create my own soundscape. So that is where the fun is. The fun is in the challenge. So if you're undermining my aesthetics in a certain way. You are undermining my sensibilities. So when I did it and showed it to them, they were more than happy. And it turned out to be far better than what that interpretation, that worked for that film, but that would not work for your film. But I learned that later when I saw those films. It was very smart, very nice, this thing. But for this film, I think I have done a fairly brilliant job.
Okay.
So it's very undermining when people give you references.
So long time back, I remember an interview which I was watching with Amitabh Bachchan. So he was saying, two kind of people come to me. So like for me to act in a film. The first kind come with a DVD and say, like, this is the film. This is before the copyright thing came in. Like, this is the film which we are making. So this is the role which you are playing. Please watch it and tell us. The second type of people come with two DVDs, give it to me, and say, the first half is that film, that DVD.
Right.
So it's like that. The referencing is like something
So
else.
coming back to originality. Now, if Bollywood has this whole its share of these. Those days they used to call them DVD directors.
Yeah.
So it's just like you could make out that they've stolen this sequence entirely, this particular sequence from this film or that sequence from that film. So that was a thing, to save time, to savor this thing. But there was no work done. There was no original work done. So that is where, even everybody attached to the film also gets kind of this thing. Whether it is you doing the camera or somebody doing the costumes or us doing the sound or somebody doing the music. When you start giving them, then it's a question of, then it's just, okay, like I'm getting paid for it and they want this kind of a thing, so let's just do it. So nobody is looking at, there's no vision in that sense. So that is a very sad thing.
Yeah. The OTT era today, so films actually come not in one language, Finally, the output is going to be in 6 different languages. How do you handle that?
So that is actually, there are teams. There are some very good people who take up the contracts of dubbing all these films in various languages. So even in India, we have some very refined people. One of them is...
So the design stays as it is. There is nothing...
So you have, like every film, you have what you call M&E tracks. We used to call them international tracks in our time. So M&E is music and effects tracks. So what they do is, suppose a Hollywood film, now they've just shut the dialogue. And you've got only the music and effects, which has been mixed, and everything is put in the right perspective. Only the language has to be dubbed and treated like it was in the original, and mixed again with the M&E tracks that were provided and released in whatever language that you want to release. Now that happens even for, say, South films and in Hindi and vice versa.
So it doesn't change anything, in fact. There is no additional work going into a film which is originally...
In terms of a sound designer, not much work, because everything is in place. There, what happens, what is crucial is the transcription more than the translation of the dialogues.
Same space.
Yeah. So if I say that, a bad workman quarrels with his tools, now you can't say that, a karigar ladta hai apne aise. You have to say naach na jane aangan tera.
Correct.
So
this transcription
is very important.
Yeah.
So, so those kind of things are there, you have to be very careful about. And what's more interesting is the songs the lyrics of the songs being changed.
Yeah.
So that is something which is
tougher.
Very tough. In fact, in my workshop in Kerala last this thing, I picked up a Harry Belafonte song because the subject of that particular documentary was very interesting. The subject was, when Jesus was born, there were these 3 wise men who came from the East, according to the Bible.
Yeah.
So they came from the Orient. That is what the Bible says. So 3 wise men. So there's a belief in Kerala that they actually went from Kerala after consulting an astrologer over there. And they consulted that astrologer, and that's how the astrologer told them that there's a star and somebody is being born over there. So I wanted to use Belafonte's rendition of Virgin Mary Had a Baby Boy. So I played that song to them, and I told them, translate it in Malayalam. And the boys worked very hard and they came very close to a transcription. So they translated that in Malayalam. And I spaced it out in such a way because there was a voiceover also in between. And so I got the song, and the voiceover was the humming of that particular song. And again, the second stanza, and again, there was a voiceover. So those two stanzas were very important about how these wise men were following this star over Bethlehem. That was a very interesting process where they learned that, this needed to be, you could not literally translate that.
Correct.
But it had to be in meter. It had to have that sort of emotion. It was about Virgin Mary having a baby boy. It was about these wise men going with various gifts to meet Christ. So that was very interesting. So what happens is very interesting with all these languages and the proficiency of these people. You want to dub it in Chinese, they can do that also. You have these people, they will do it in Chinese, they will do it in Arabic. So they have teams all over the world where they can do that.
So these days, like, a lot of people watch films at home.
Yeah.
You have a bigger TV and, a 5.1 system and all that. Like, do you think about the home audience when you're designing a film?
It's more a mixing issue. Because design should play...
Some elements will come into that.
Design elements, whether you're seeing the phone on, seeing your film on the phone, or you're watching the film on satellite television, or your cable television, whatever.
It's the same.
Or your OTT in your home theater system. The mix should not change the culture of the sound. Like if it should sound good on stereo, it should sound good on film also. So you need to tweak it in such a way that it, when you're playing the same thing.
Mono to Atmos, you need to accommodate.
Yeah. So you need to, like I was saying, that this is a cup, it will fit a certain thing. So even in Atmos, we kind of scale down the whole process to fit it into a home theater kind of an environment. Because there's a limitation of the bandwidth.
Would it be a compromise?
It should not sound like a compromise. If you're looking at it from the theater point of view, yes, it is a compromise. I would like to watch a film properly in a theater. So it is as much a compromise for you as a DOP,
Correct.
as a cameraman.
The experience is different.
Yes, and your OTT also is scaling down what you had shot down into that. So it is that compromise. But we are not judging quality over there, we are getting information.
No, I'm saying when you are mixing it for a film which is going to be shown in theater, would you put all that potential there, or would you be doing it a scaled down version thinking that it will be viewed?
No, I'm not going to scale down my design for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the base in this thing. In fact, we do that. Today, there's a process of, after doing the film mix, there's a separate OTT mix that is done. OTT mix not starting from scratch, but from the stems of the big film that you've done. So you scale down, the extra low LF that is there.
So all the tracks which was there in the final mix, you would remix again?
You would cut out certain frequencies which are not relevant to an OTT because those will overload the sound, but it will squeeze the sound. So, anyways, those sounds the bandwidth will not allow any, you cannot fit into that smaller bandwidth. So you're going to excess bass jo anyway sunai nahi dega. You're going to remove that. And you will do some kind of tweaking where, in an OTT kind of environment, how it is going to sound. So these films are mixed in a smaller room, in an OTT environment. So then you know that this is how it is going to sound.
Even color correction places, they have TVs now. I mean, screen,
Yes.
Sort of a theater where I work. So
even when suppose the trailer or a sequence that is going to be released on digital, I do a stereo mix of that particular trailer and I listen to it on the phone. So I have to listen to it on the phone because not everybody has a headphone. They're going to watch it on the phone. They're going to just hear it like that. So it should more or less, that the low frequency, the low end is not going to come over there, but it should be crystal clear enough to translate, whatever is there.
How does a film's budget affect your work in terms of, I understand the issues, but I'm saying, do you take budget into consideration when you start the design, or how does it go?
See, what happens is, it relates to the number of, the time you're going to spend
Basically
on that
the
film.
time.
The time and the number of people you're going to involve. I would like to not have a dagger over my head. No, nobody would like to. But what happens is like I don't want it also to become a compromise.
Correct.
So I try and prevent that by starting the work earlier, or by working extra hours so that I get my desired quality. I should not say that time nahi tha isliye maine nahi kiya. So I try and avoid that situation altogether. But there is a restraint. Like I want 100 people to cheer and sound like that. So when the production tells me that we can only afford 60, then it kills your enthusiasm to a certain extent. So, but when they say 30, when they realize that 30 are going to sound huge, so then it's a thing. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for the film.
Absolutely.
So we are talking about scale. We are talking about I had fights in a lot of films where I'm trying to tell them, boss, I need scale. You can't tell me to hurry up things because.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to hurry up until I get this. I know where until where I can stretch it. So don't override my thing.
Yeah. Now, coming to the end, see, many of my viewers are like people who are trying to make short films and trying to make a smaller pitch for a film and things like that. Do you have any advice for them to get a good sound?
See, that is something which is usually ignored or not taken into account. They do everything, but they don't take sound into account. You get very nice small setups to, even if you're doing like a podcast or a YouTube kind of a film, you get very good equipment, microphones and stuff like that. That I find a lot of people in the West are very particular about this, but over here it's neglected, and usually people are, sound has the sound is perceived as a very technical medium. It is not that today. Today it is all, it's not that technical. Anybody can design sound. You don't have to be technically a sound engineer to do that. It is your aesthetics. You have computers today. You have this thing today. So you can sit and design sounds yourself, whether you are an editor, a director, a composer. But there is always this thing that, if you have physically been recording over the period of time, so it is not just a question of taking a sound from the library and putting it and designing.
Correct.
That is not sound design.
Yeah.
So it is your process.
Put your mind into it.
How you have recorded it, it is going to translate later. So these are very complex things. But for people who are wanting to do sound, then you just need to get some good equipment. You have to do a proper mix of the sound.
And think about sound.
Think about sound. So when you're going and recording over there, when you're standing, I've seen a lot of press interviews, they park themselves near the road and they start speaking. Arey bhaiya, take a slightly secluded area. I'm talking about these news guys. So I agree that the backdrop there's all these things going on. But then you can take a secluded spot which is relatively quiet and you can say it.
No, I'm talking about short filmmakers, people who make those films.
Yeah.
They need to think about sound as a character and work for that, other than just using a dialogue track and a music track, some music track. So.
Yes. So that is something which they eventually realize once they're in the post. That never features during the shoot.
Correct.
So even when you're shooting say a fictional subject, documentaries of course you can't do much because you have to go to that particular location.
Yeah.
But when you're doing fiction, you have to understand that there has to be a sound recce. This mistake even the big film guys make. They don't take the sound people along. And they realize that, okay, there's this problem. And how the location is going to sound. Is it reflective? Do you need to do any soundproofing in that particular room? Do you need to deaden the sound with mattresses and carpets? So these are things that even on a smaller scale you should do.
Yeah.
You should be able to understand how it is going to relate. But unless you have an understanding of sound, it will not matter to you. And then usually there are a lot of people who do the sound themselves and they're not sound recordists as such. But get a proper sound man. Like you're getting a proper cameraman to shoot. Get a proper sound guy to also shoot. Because what happens is it's a very physical thing that good picture quality, bad sound, people get put off.
Yeah.
Bad picture quality but good sound is not so disturbing. I mean, I'm sorry to say,
I would argue the other way around.
but it does not. But you don't because constantly you are you are expecting, when you're seeing the picture, you're expecting the sound also to come. But when the sound does not come, then you're missing out on things. So
Yeah.
your mind shifts from a good quality picture to, kya bola hai usne? Why am I not hearing this? There's too much of disturbance. But if you have a smooth sounding sound, even an ordinary picture will start sounding better. This happened actually with Raju Hirani, when Lagirao Munna was not sync sound. So he was working with the pilot sound.
Yeah, I know.
So then he told me that, why don't you send me, now the dub is over, can you send me the dubs? So I replaced all the sounds with the dub sounds and I sent him the dialogue track. Next day he comes, his assistant opens the thing. And then suddenly Raju asks him, ki online picture kahan se mila? What translated as a good sound
Oh, what
with
picture?
a clean sound, suddenly his picture started seeming, the quality of picture is improved. But actually the quality of the sound is improved. So, ye hota hai, it's a very physical thing.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that grows on you. I keep telling people that, the experienced cameraman does not need the light meter anymore. He looks at the light, he looks at his hand and he says, okay, this is the exposure I'm going to set. So similar things happen to us when we walk into a room. When I'm walking into this room, I already know what the acoustic problem of this room is, if there is a problem.
Correct.
Also, when you're mixing the film, I started off in my living room. So I had a projector which I told Pradeep that I'm keeping your projector. And I took his projector and I would mix it with the film. So I had a temporary screen, I had the projector, I had a bigger image. So then I was trying to save projector lamp lights. So I said I will mix it on TV and then later I will see it on that. When I did that,
It's a huge difference.
I realized that, boss, what is this? Then what happened with a smaller visual that you are watching, your sound also became very small.
Yeah.
So you are not taking those dynamics, you are not allowing those dynamics. Then I said, oh, I can't do that. So I then had a bigger picture, I did the projection, then I realized that I can do these dynamics. I can, slam this, I can burst this, I can do that. Then it sounded like, now it is sounding like a film.
There are a lot of stuff which I wanted to talk to you further,
Yeah,
but I think we have crossed our time frame.
no problem.
So we'll sit again another
Yeah.
time, maybe
Just let me know, man.
after reactions from people,
Yeah.
more questions will come, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we'll just come into that. Is there anything which you missed out or which you want to talk about?
As of now, no, because we've kept it a very informal kind of a session.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we just kind of.
I had things like, I had stories like, I have had a location sound recordist having huge argument with the star, because he doesn't want to wear a lapel. You already have two booms here. Like, why do you want a lapel? And, I've seen all these kind of things.
Yeah, those are very stupid.
Yeah.
That's what happens is let you do your work, but you let me do my work also. That is something which people should respect.
Yeah.
Because eventually you will end up doing a dub.
Correct.
So we are trying to prevent that. We are trying to get the best sound out of it. So if you're going to be so stubborn about it, then it is automatically creating a very negative environment around.
So I had written what is the difference between lapel and a boom? Which one you prefer?
It's a combination of both. You cannot do without either. So usually the boom microphones, they are much better in terms of quality than the lapel. So what happens is lapel gives you a good quality of highs, gives you a good quality of intelligibility is better in the lapel mics, but the body comes from the boom. So it has to be a very fair balance between the
So
two.
you mix both?
You mix both.
Okay.
In many of the cases, you need to mix both.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the boom also captures a lot of other sounds. And it depends on it depends on the situation, it depends on the angle, it depends on the magnification, the lens that you're using, which is our enemy.
Correct. There are two questions which I missed out. One was what happened to our independent music scene? You remember in the 90s,
Yeah.
a lot of bands coming up with albums and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which kind of disappeared.
That's a very sad thing that happened because we had MTV, we had Channel V back in the day, and that suddenly gave. Then a lot of these people came in. Silk Route came in, which I had recorded at that time. OkCK Savan Shantanu had come in. There was Euphoria that came in. There was Daler Mendi. There was Miku. All these guys were breaking into the scene, and the kind of music they were doing just shook up the, it changed, it tucker the area to the, the film industry, because the film industry is hammering its own formula of music. And suddenly you had this very alternate indie music coming in. People started loving it. They're watching on TV, they're watching on this thing. Today, of course, you have it, on social media, you have it. But the drive suddenly got killed, because then the channels started, then the Bollywood started taking over. And, there was no exposure.
Yeah.
There was no exposure of relatively unknown artists. And today, social media
It's there.
is taking
Making.
that, but the content is, you're not getting that sort of popularity. As it is, what happens is, in India, film is the ultimate. Matlab, you, Muralidharan, is going to make a name when you're working in a huge, big feature film. So it does not matter how many films you've worked on or music videos you've worked on. So similarly with all of us, even for a music, that everybody sits up and,
That's the ultimate aim.
that's the ultimate platform, unfortunately, because that's our biggest platform. We don't have a proper music industry. We did not have a proper television industry.
True.
Today, there's a television industry. The music industry is still lagging behind, because our popularity of songs was a fallout of the films. Independent songs people would never.
Yeah.
Though in Bengal, and it was very, people did not care about film music. So it had its own set of this thing. And similarly, some folk music from various other parts. So mainstream music in Calcutta they did not miss film music. They equally had a very powerful and strong independent, music industry.
It's probably because of the big music companies kind of failed in their revenue system.
No, the music companies came, and actually, I don't know whether they helped or what, but they were definitely not promoting or helping new stars and stuff like that. So it just, I don't know, I don't have very good things to say about music companies, because they, even internationally,
Also, it's like that.
it's like that. So there are social media outlets, but a normal person, like it's not just the younger generation who's listening to music. I mean, I'd like to listen to a certain kind, or my generation wants to listen, or my slightly older generation, they want to. They're not so tech savvy that they will listen to, this thing. For them, it was easier to, sometimes I find it easier to go and, buy a cassette or a CD in those days.
Right.
But today I have to hunt for,
Correct.
all these other,
Where do you get it?
where, like, Spotify se loon, ya Apple Music se loon, kahan se loon. So the accessibility of things have become a little more remote.
There was another question which I left out was silence. How important is it? We keep filling up spaces between dialogue with music.
There's never anything called perfect silence,
But what you were saying in between, in the beginning,
Uh-huh.
like when you are meditating, you close
Yeah.
your eyes and you hear
Yes.
the sounds outside.
Yeah.
In a film,
Yeah.
you're recreating that.
Yeah.
And at some point, suppose you shut off everything, it's a
Yeah.
huge different feeling in a film,
Yeah.
which is not used much in our films. But
It is a very, you never have silence. Back in the day, we used to use SST, because complete silence would again be very distracting. So you had SST, which gave that, slight hiss or the
Green.
crackle or pop. Today, there is atmospheric sounds that we use, because digital, there is no crackle and pops and stuff like that. But you need to have that little bed of something, like a room tone. So there's never absolute silence.
yeah, but then we don't use it. That's what I was saying. We kind of fill it.
Silence is very relative again. But you need to have a powerful story so that silence can, hold the audience.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you have that silence, then people start whistling and, throwing things at the screen. So, that is the fear that many of the directors have, कि यहाँ लोग चिल्लाएंगे.
There was an interview which I gave where I said a line that like we don't make films, we shoot radio plays. It's like,
Yeah, it's absolutely that.
So it's like they put that as the title of the interview.
Yeah.
So it's radio plays,
Yeah.
scared of having silence on screen.
Yes. It's very, very difficult. In fact, there was one scene in Piku, just recalling, when you were talking about the early evening thing, it just reminded me of that. There was one scene. It was again a very rough print, ungraded kind of a print. But it was a scene where Irfan and it's a very awkward moment between Deepika and Irfan because Irfan is not. He says, "I'm not a driver. I can't sleep in the car. I need to sleep in the room, and the hotel is booked. It's full. So there's a slight sexual tension between between Piku and this character. So she says, now what to do? Then sleep in my room. And all this is happening when they had entered Banaras. And it was slightly, the whole thing was dark. And there I had floated across this thing. I had made, I had asked the composer to record one thumri. So I put the thumri over there. It was working like magical. And it was dark and you could just barely see Irfan's outline and Deepika in the foreground, that kind of a scene. So it was a very nice thing. But next when I saw the actual graded print, suddenly that whole thing lit up. And nobody noticed that thumri. Even I didn't notice that thumri. So it just lost its magical touch. Because what happens is when there's darkness, your perception of hearing becomes much more acute.
Yeah.
That's how visually impaired people navigate themselves.
Yeah. Okay, Vishwas, thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you.
I think it went off well.
Yeah,
So,
I hope so.
hope to see you again.
Thank you. Great work you're doing.
Yeah, let's see.